Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where tofu, yes, that soft humble block, reigns supreme in the bustling kitchens of the Tang Dynasty. If that sounds like a snooze fest, brace yourself, because you probably won't survive this intricate web of midnight cooking mischief and imperial spectacle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I'm always curious how far and wide our little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edges of a grand hallway lit by flickering lanterns. The Tang Dynasty is in full swing, an era that, historically, spans roughly from 618 to 907 AD, and is often hailed as a golden age of Chinese arts, culture, and innovation. Tonight, though, you're no concerned scholar poring over ancient scrolls. You're sneaking around an imperial palace well after bedtime, drawn by an irresistible aroma that beckons from somewhere deep inside the labyrinth of corridors. Each passing step reveals more echoes of quiet footsteps, more hushed exchanges between servants scurrying to deliver fresh ingredients. Someone drops a pot in the distance, and you freeze, heart pounding, but nobody seems to care. In a place this large, the mild clatter is just part of the soundtrack. As you continue deeper, you catch a whiff of sesame oil and fermented bean paste swirling through the cool night air. This scent is your guiding star, a fragrant beacon leading you to the famed imperial kitchens. Even in the inky hush of midnight, the action here never stops. You peek around a corner and see a row of cooks in their distinctive Tang-style robes swirling ladles in giant pots, wiping sweat from their brows and calling out orders in hushed but urgent tones. The rhythmic chop of cleavers creates a gentle lullaby that almost lulls you into a trance. You might wonder why they're cooking at this hour. Well, let's just say that entertaining an empress and all his officials, friends, and random hangers on is a marathon, not a sprint. If the emperor suddenly craves a midnight snack, you don't hand him yesterday's leftovers. No, you deliver delicacies so fresh they practically hum. And right now, there's a kind of hush, like the calm before a flavorful storm, as the final touches go into something special tofu dishes that, rumor has it, might just bend your preconceived notions of what tofu can be. The Tang court, with all its grandeur, prided itself on pushing the boundaries of cuisine. Chefs here are borderline wizards, conjuring up elaborate feasts from raw vegetables, meats, spices, and occasionally an ingredient so bizarre you'd suspect it came from a half-mythical land. One mainstream historical fact worth noting is that tea culture boomed in the Tang-era, fostering an environment of refined taste and culinary experimentation. So, if you think the only, wild, thing about the Tang was the poetry of Labai, guess again. Behind closed kitchen doors, chefs were mixing up new flavor profiles faster than a modern TV cooking competition. And right here, in this midnight corridor, you sense that tofu is at the heart of tonight's big gastronomic unveiling. A few busy attendants hurry by with trays brimming with soft, gleaming tofu cubes. How did they discover such a versatile soybean curd so early on? That's one of the many mysteries swirling around these halls. Some say it was an accidental invention by a resourceful cook who curdled soy milk with impure sea salt. Others claim the origins trace back further, crossing borders and traveling along trade routes from distant lands. Historians still argue whether tofu first popped up in China during the Han Dynasty, or if the Tang chefs simply refined an older recipe to its peak brilliance. By now, you're inching along the perimeter of the main kitchen. Lantern light throws dancing shadows against the walls, giving the entire scene a flickering, dreamlike vibe. Fires glow under massive woks. Steam hisses as water meets scalding metal, and chefs, with well-practiced grace, juggle tasks that would overwhelm most of us, like your friend who attempts to replicate a 5-tier wedding cake after watching one tutorial online. Except these professionals succeed, and they do it under the pressure of imperial scrutiny. You pass a small side table laden with exotic ingredients, dried mushrooms in thick clusters, black as ink, salted fish from the coastal regions, fresh scallions that still glisten with dew, and something that looks suspiciously like pickled lotus root. A fringe tidbit you might find odd: some chefs in the Tang-era occasionally experimented with donkey milk to wash certain ingredients, partly to remove odors, partly because donkey milk was rumored, possibly by comedic court gossip, to magically enhance flavors. Whether it worked or was just an old wives' tale, well, the verdict's still out. But it shows the lengths these culinary pioneers went to craft dishes that defied the norm. You carefully step across the threshold into the kitchen itself. The warmth hits you first, wrapping around you like a comforting blanket. Tending an imperial feast is a sweaty affair, especially when you're whipping up tofu creations that are rumored to incorporate everything from fried glutinous rice shells to delicate sweet bean pastes. You spot an older chef, hair tied back in a neat knot, meticulously pressing tofu until it's thin as parchment. Another carefully spices a pot of broth that will soon cradle silken tofu cubes. There's talk of shaping tofu to resemble slices of roast duck, all to tantalize the emperor's taste buds with a playful twist. Meatless, but with the taste and texture of actual poultry. Impossible. Tofu, if you will, centuries before the modern concept of plant-based meat. Amid the frantic artistry, you can't help but feel a ripple of excitement, almost as if you're backstage at a grand theatrical production. Indeed, in these kitchens, the line between cook and performer blurs. Every swirl of the ladle or flick of the wrist holds the promise of delight or disappointment in the emperor's eyes. Yet here you stand, unnoticed, a silent spectator to one of history's lesser-known shows, the birth of experimental tofu cuisine. To your right, you notice a small corridor leading away into the darkness. Soft laughter echoes from that direction, perhaps from some junior cook sneaking a taste or sharing inside, jokes about the new tofu dish that almost walked away on its own. You consider investigating, but the pull of the main kitchen is stronger. A wide simmering pot catches your eye. Something is bubbling inside that looks thick and rich, likely a prototype sauce to pair with tofu. The aroma calls to you like a lullaby. For a moment, the crackle of the hearth and the gentle hum of activity almost make you forget you're trespassing in an imperial domain. In the background, you catch a comedic snippet of conversation. One apprentice is telling another that if they keep stirring too slowly, the tofu will transform into a strange, rubbery mass that'll bounce right off the emperor's plate. Maybe even break a vase or two. Another chuckles and speeds up, elbows pumping in a comical flurry. It's a reminder that behind all this grandeur, these are just people making the best food they can, sometimes with a dash of humor. You slip into the shadows, your senses overwhelmed by the tapestry of sounds and scents. Strange as it may be, you feel safe here. It's not just the warmth of the stoves, but the camaraderie you can sense among the kitchen staff. There's a collective mission to please the emperor's palate, to do justice to their craft, to elevate a simple soybean curd into something legendary. This is where the Tang-era feast truly begins. Under cover of night, fueled by passion and spurred on by the belief that even tofu can be transformed into a dish worthy of royal praise. Your nose leads you away from the warm bustle toward a quieter corner of the kitchen, where a group of apprentice cooks sits cross-legged on the floor, whispering tales about tofu's origins. One of them, a boy no older than 14, lifts a small wooden dish that holds a few trembling squares. "Do you know how this even came to be?" he asks, voice low but animated. The others lean in, eyes shining with curiosity. You do too. After all, tofu, with its creamy texture and mild taste, seems so commonplace now. Yet, in these Tang Dynasty kitchens, it's revered like a rare gem. Someone offers up the classic legend that an ancient cook accidentally curdled soy milk by mixing an impure salt, rich in calcium and magnesium centuries ago. Another counters that the best guess is during the Han Dynasty, possibly around the 2nd century BC. Historians still argue whether it was discovered earlier in China, or if foreign influences brought some version of it through travelers along the Silk Road. The young apprentice says, fiddling with the corner of his apron. You sense the spark of a debate. These kids might not be full-fledged historians, but they've clearly heard conflicting lore from their elders. One mainstream fact emerges in this hushed conversation. The earliest textual references to bean curd indeed show up in documents attributed to the Han era, though it wasn't nearly as popular or refined as what you see now in the Tang. You inch closer, careful not to rustle your garments too loudly on the tiled floor. The group seems to be telling an even older story, how a prince who had turned to vegetarian meals discovered a strange new bean product. Allegedly, his personal cooks tinkered with boiling and mashing soybeans until they produced a soft curd that he found oddly pleasant. Also, the rumor goes. The apprentice recounting the tale puffs out his chest, obviously proud he can recite these half-legend, fact narratives with such flair. You can't blame him. In an era when knowledge is gleaned from painstakingly copied scrolls or passed along by word of mouth, a single story might shift and transform more times than you can count. Someone cracks a playful joke. Maybe tofu fell from the heavens, and the emperor back then just pretended to invent it. A ripple of laughter spreads through the apprentices. Another teases that tofu must have originated from an alchemist's laboratory. After all, this is the Tang Dynasty, an age steeped in both real science and borderline sorcery. They recall how the court once employed alchemists to concoct elixirs of immortality. If those potions regularly blew up, maybe tofu was one of the safer byproducts. The group giggles again, and you feel yourself smiling. In a place that can be quite strict and hierarchical, these glimpses of humor are like gentle gusts of cool wind in a hot kitchen. Further along, a senior cook stands beside a tall barrel of soaking soybeans, occasionally tossing in a pinch of something from a small sachet that dangles from his belt. You can't quite see what it is, but it reminds you of the rumor about donkey milk or other improbable ingredients people use to experiment with. Perhaps it's a coagulant or a secret spice. It could even be powdered shells of some weird sea creature. Yes, that's a fringe tidbit you've heard whispered. Certain cooks in remote villages occasionally used ground oyster shells to help set the tofu. Whether it truly imparts a superior flavor or is just a local superstition is anyone's guess. Curiosity compels you to wander deeper into this corner, where a few historical scrolls lie unrolled on a small table. A candle flickers next to them, its flame dancing across the inked characters. You can't read everything from your angle, but the words "Tofu" and "Imperial Table" catch your eye. It seems the scribes or the head cooks have been noting down some sort of official record, maybe an evolving menu or a treatise on the significance of bean curd in the royal diet. While the Tang-era is known for many feats, like woodblock printing and advanced poetry, food documentation wasn't always a top priority. Yet, these early attempts to record tofu's role show that the chefs aren't just winging it. They're systematically trying to understand and perfect this curious dish. Suddenly, a gentle commotion in the adjacent hallway pulls your attention. Two attendants shuffle by, each carrying a tray piled high with blocks of firm tofu. They move with the reverence you'd expect if they were transporting fine silk or precious porcelain. Once they vanish around the corner, the apprentices return to their chatter, speculating how tofu first slipped onto royal tables. That was definitely thanks to the emperor's wife, or so the story goes, offers one. She was health-conscious and demanded lighter fare. Another shakes his head. No, I heard it was a Buddhist monk who introduced it to the palace. He cooked it for some official who became obsessed with the taste. Yet another chimes in. Or maybe it was some traveling merchant who bragged about bean curd's nutritional value, persuading the palace to give it a try. You remember something about Buddhism and vegetarian cuisine being deeply intertwined, especially during the Tang. Monasteries often served simple, plant-based meals, tofu included, to adhere to their dietary principles. That could very well be a stepping stone for tofu's acceptance at the imperial level. It seems logical a refined, cultured environment might be open to new possibilities, especially ones that align with spiritual or health-related reasons. As you reflect on these stories, you realize just how many roads converge to bring tofu onto the emperor's plate. No single narrative stands unchallenged. Each piece of gossip is another thread in the tapestry. Across the room, a barrel-chested man wearing a chef's robe scans the apprentices with a hawk-like gaze. He approaches them and gently cuffs one on the head. More a gesture of affection than punishment. Back to work. He mutters in a good-natured growl. Then he spots you, and for a split second you brace for a scolding. But he only raises an eyebrow, as though to say, "Ha! Another stray!" and leaves you be. The apprentices scatter, each returning to their assigned tasks: cleaning, slicing, pounding. Within moments, the hush returns, broken only by the soft slosh of soaking soybeans and the faint sizzling from the main kitchen area. You quietly leaf through one of the abandoned scrolls. Its calligraphy is neat, describing a court official's impression of tofu, calling it like snow, but warm and pleasing on the tongue. Another line mentions how it could be steamed, fried, stewed, or even sweetened for dessert. The descriptions read almost poetically, typical of Tang literary style. Tofu isn't just an ingredient here, it's a symbol of culinary ingenuity, a testament to how the empire's ambition extends beyond borders and battlefields, reaching into the realm of flavor and texture. Suddenly, a muffled roar of laughter erupts from the main kitchen, and you peer through the doorway. A batch of tofu has apparently turned out firmer than expected, bouncing slightly when one unfortunate cook drops it. Maybe we can use it as armor plating, someone quips, and the entire kitchen echoes with laughter. The comedic relief underscores the experimental nature of this entire enterprise. In pushing tofu to its limits, these chefs walk a fine line between success and fiasco. Sometimes you discover, impossible, dishes that rival the best meat-based flavors. Other times, you're left with something that could double as a building material. Returning your attention to the quiet corner, you notice an abandoned mortar and pestle. Within it, a pasty mixture of ground soybean residue and some unidentifiable herbs congeals in the bottom. You imagine that the cooks have tried every variation, adding tea leaves, sprinkling exotic spices from the southwestern provinces, or even mincing fruit peels to create a tangy note. This is the unglamorous heart of innovation: trial, error, and a willingness to discard failure. Before you slip back into the main area, you spot an older scroll that looks almost too delicate to touch. The title references methods of bean transformation, and you suspect it might contain some ancient secrets. Perhaps it even reveals how tofu was served at grand banquets to demonstrate the empire's sophistication and generosity to foreign dignitaries. You'd love to linger and decipher more, but the press of activity and the watchful eyes of the master chefs suggest it's best not to overstay your welcome here. Stepping away, you carry a new appreciation for tofu's mysterious roots. It wasn't just born in these Tang kitchens, it journeyed through centuries, weaving through myths, spiritual traditions, culinary experimentation, and maybe even accidents that turned into strokes of genius. As you merge back into the hum of the palace's culinary nerve center, you can't help but feel that each block of tofu holds a bit of that layered history, molding itself to the whims of time, culture, and taste, sliding seamlessly from monk's table to imperial feast. You edge closer to the core of the imperial kitchen, where the night's real sorcery seems to unfold. The clang of ladles, the hiss of steam, and the chatter of cooks weave together like an otherworldly song. In the middle of this human whirlpool stands a long, wooden table strewn with bowls of strange powders and jars of cloudy liquids. Even in the dim, lantern-lit atmosphere, you can see an almost theatrical flourish in the way the head chef sprinkles these powders into a large cauldron of thick soybean slurry. There's a distinct hush as everyone watches to see if the mixture will curdle at the perfect moment or collapse into a soggy mess. This is the culinary magic you've heard whispered about. The Tang Dynasty chefs, emboldened by the era's spirit of innovation, are determined to push tofu to its absolute limits. They're trying to create dishes so convincing, so flavorful, that even the emperor, accustomed to the finest meats and exotic delicacies, might pause mid-chew, eyebrows arching in delighted confusion. That desire drives them to mix and match ingredients you'd never expect: fermented black beans, dried chrysanthemum petals, aged vinegar from the southern provinces, or even a dash of powdered seaweed rumored to add a subtle brightness. Some would call it madness, but these chefs see it as an art form. You watch from a safe distance as a young cook lifts a gourd of pale liquid with trembling hands, ready to pour it into the pot. Another chef leans over, swiftly pulling out a pinch of bright orange spice from a tiny lacquer box. "Ready?" she asks, voice tight with anticipation. The cook nods, his eyes wide. Then, in a swift motion, both ingredients are added. Everyone around the table cranes their neck to see if the pot will foam, fizz, or remain stubbornly inert. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, slowly, a faint swirl of color appears, like swirling galaxies across the surface. A collective sigh rises, part relief, part awe. Culinary magic is no small gamble. You recall how mainstream history credits the Tang Dynasty as a period of technological breakthroughs. Woodblock printing, refined porcelain techniques, advanced mathematics, and more. What often goes overlooked is how that same pioneering energy spilled into the kitchens. While official records might focus on grand military campaigns or political reforms, the quieter corners of the empire saw leaps in gastronomic experimentation. From fermented sauces to precise slicing methods, Tang chefs were as much scientists as they were artists. Their quest for impossible tofu dishes, ones that mimicked the texture of fish or carried the smoky essence of roasted duck, wasn't merely to show off. It was to prove that the empire's ingenuity knew no boundaries, not even in the realm of a humble soybean. Another cook steps forward, lifting a wooden tray of tofu squares, shaped to look like medallions. They're glistening as though brushed with oil, and the aroma that wafts towards you has a rich depth, similar to braised meat. He sets them gently into a steamer lined with banana leaves imported from the southern territories. Apparently, the banana leaves are rumored to infuse the tofu with a subtle sweetness and help maintain the perfect moisture level. A fringe tidbit you overhear from a nearby helper: sometimes these leaves also impart a hint of fruitiness, though it can backfire if they're not fresh enough. Then the tofu might end up smelling a bit like musty old books. Talk about culinary roulette. You circle around a heavy black pot that exudes an enticing, peppery scent, Thick ribbons of steam billow from its mouth, reminding you of an alchemist's cauldron. Peeking inside, you see tofu strips simmering with mushrooms, spring onions, and a mysterious dark sauce. A cook stirs gently, explaining in a soft, almost reverent tone that this dish aims to replicate the texture of eel, a prized delicacy some members of the court adore. If successful, the tofu won't merely taste good. It'll boast that slippery, meaty feel that might fool a less discerning diner. Yet the cook admits that nailing the perfect combination of chewiness and flavor is trickier than catching lightning in a teacup. Nearby, a row of mortar and pestle stations line the wall, each manned by a perspiring apprentice. They work in rhythmic tandem, grinding roasted sesame seeds, garlic, and what looks like a handful of dried shrimp shells. Shrimp shells in tofu. That's a new one. You think, raising an eyebrow. But in the eyes of these Tang Dynasty innovators, no possibility is too outlandish. If they can harness the essence of shrimp without using actual shrimp meat, they believe they can craft a tofu-based dish that tastes like a fresh catch from the ocean. Historians still argue whether some of these more radical experiments truly took place or if they're embellished by later storytellers. But tonight, you're standing in the thick of it, witnessing attempts that blur the line between fact and legend. A burst of laughter echoes from across the room. It's the steamer crew, apparently enthralled by a small fiasco. One apprentice accidentally added honey instead of vinegar, resulting in a bizarrely sweet tofu that's caramelizing on the edges. We might have invented dessert tofu. Someone jokes, stirring the mishap to prevent it from burning. Another chimes in. Let's call it candied curd. Maybe the emperor will love it, and we'll all become famous. You can't help but snicker at the idea of an imperial feast featuring gummy, honeyed tofu squares. Then again, that might be the next big culinary breakthrough. Sometimes the best discoveries happen by accident, like that time you tried baking banana bread and ended up with something resembling a doorstop. You drift back to the main table, where the head chef is gently testing the consistency of a newly formed tofu block. He slices a thin piece and holds it up to the lantern light, examining its translucence like a jeweler inspects a prized gem. The tension in his face suggests that impossible tofu is not just a dish. It's a statement of skill, a vow to the emperor that the Tang kitchen can produce wonders beyond imagination. They're chasing the ephemeral line between artistry and illusion, creating dishes that confound expectations. In a kitchen fueled by resourcefulness, you wonder if the next step is tofu shaped into mythical dragons that breathe steam instead of fire. One of the other head cooks, in a light-hearted moment, smirks and says, "We should serve this to the emperor with a note that reads, 'No animals were harmed in the making of this dish, except maybe the donkey we borrowed milk from.'" At this, a few surrounding cooks cough to hide their chuckles. The donkey milk rumor persists here, though no one will officially confirm or deny it. If it is in use, it's definitely not something they want widely known. Even in the Tang court, some secrets are best left unsaid, especially when the emperor's palate and pride are at stake. The pot you've been eyeing finally finishes simmering. The cook ladles out a slice of tofu that glistens with sauce, then passes it to a helper for tasting. You watch as the helper closes his eyes and takes a careful bite. There's a pause, a slight widening of the eyes, and then a slow nod. A surge of excitement ripples through the onlookers. Success. It might not be a perfect eel imitation, but it's delicious enough to spark a new wave of bold experimentation. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief. For every triumph like this, there are half a dozen dishes that flop spectacularly, some burning, some turning rubbery, some just tasting of bland bean mush. But the promise of that one success, the possibility that tonight's triumph might become tomorrow's legend, is enough to keep everyone pushing forward. You wander around, sampling the sensory tapestry of sights and smells. The crackling of wood fires, the swirl of pungent spices, the chatter of hopeful voices, it all lulls you into a dreamlike state. At times you forget the hour is well past midnight. The adrenaline of innovation pulses through the kitchen, eclipsing the usual lull that darkness brings. Even your feet, initially wary from wandering these endless corridors, feel lighter as if energized by the creative spirit in the air. Somewhere near the back, you catch sight of a tall wooden rack stocked with shaped molds, fish molds, bird molds, even a small phoenix mold. These are used to press tofu into whimsical forms that can surprise unsuspecting diners. Imagine biting into what looks like a delicate fish fillet, only to discover the soft, creamy interior of tofu. Another comedic idea crosses your mind: if they ever shape tofu into coins, maybe they could trick a greedy official into chewing on money. Then again, Trying that might land them in a cell faster than you can say, bean curd. As the cooks continue their intricate dance of measuring, pouring, stirring, and tasting, you realize this is the essence of Tang culinary magic. It's not merely about feeding people, it's about storytelling and illusion, about transcending the ordinary. They're turning simple soybeans into regal feasts, challenging assumptions about what's possible. Whether it's the donkey milk obscure spices, or sheer willpower, these chefs are forging a gastronomic revolution in these very pots and pans. Looking around, you sense that each successful, possible, tofu dish carries a spark of joy that crackles through the staff. And with each success, the bar for what tofu can become rises higher, inching ever closer to genuine alchemy. With your senses still buzzing from the fragrant madness of the imperial kitchen, you decide it's time to see how these culinary wonders take shape behind closed doors. The clang of wok lids and the crackle of wood fires fade as you slip into a dimly lit corridor lined with ornate tapestries. You pass a small alcove where two junior chefs huddle, exchanging hushed secrets. One glances up, eyes wide, then quickly turns away. Clearly, these palace kitchens hold more than just cooking utensils. They contain guarded innovations that only the elite chefs and their trusted aides are allowed to witness. You follow the corridor deeper into the palace, noticing the architecture that exemplifies Tang elegance, sweeping curves, carved wooden beams, and the faint perfume of incense drifting from corners you can't quite see. Along the walls, you spot small windows. Through them, you can glimpse moonlit gardens and koi ponds shimmering like silver pools. This sense of regal calm contrasts sharply with the frenetic energy of the kitchen, making you feel like you're walking the line between two different universes. Up ahead, a slender figure in a dark robe beckons you into a narrow hallway. You obey instinctively, curiosity driving you onward. The figure vanishes around a bend, and as you round the corner, you see a small door guarded by an older man in a plain robe. He eyes you thoughtfully, but again, in this dreamlike spell of the Midnight Palace, no one seems inclined to stop you. Instead, the guard steps aside, allowing you to slip into a cramped chamber lit by a single lantern. Inside, half a dozen palace chefs crowd around a table scattered with earthenware jars, bamboo scrolls, and cryptic diagrams. You can practically taste the tension. One chef, his sleeves rolled up, is carefully measuring ground spices into a small porcelain bowl. Another updates a scroll with neat calligraphy, jotting down notes on new tofu variants. It occurs to you that you might be seeing the blueprint for future imperial banquets. Taste profiles, cooking temperatures, even the shape and color of each dish. A soft cluck of disapproval draws your attention to a woman wearing a slightly more elaborate robe. She's a head chef, presumably the leader of this covert gathering. With a measured sigh, she examines the powders and liquids set out before her. "We need the ratio exact," she says, her voice low, "or we end up with a pancake of tasteless bean paste." You get the impression that whatever they're cooking up in here must be top secret. Perhaps it's an upcoming dish designed to dazzle the emperor in a few nights, or maybe even a side project for an ambitious feast that will overshadow all prior creations. As you edge closer, you notice a few lines of text scrawled on a bamboo slip. One mainstream historical fact jumps out at you, a reference to the Tang court's meticulous record-keeping of banquets. It mentions that during Emperor Xuanzong's reign, palace archivists sometimes detailed multi-course feasts that featured tofu prepared a dozen different ways, each course more inventive than the last. The text suggests these records serve not just to preserve tradition, but also to fuel culinary one-upmanship. If a neighboring kingdom dared to outdo the Tang in matters of taste, the emperor would have his chefs refine yet another version of tofu, forging a new surprise for the next banquet. Curiosity brims in your chest. You lean in to read more but halt when someone moves abruptly, blocking your view. A stout chef places a jar of murky liquid on the table with a conspiratorial grin. "Here's the donkey milk you asked for," he says in a mock whisper that's still perfectly audible. A couple of the other chefs snicker. The head chef shoots him a warning glare. Clearly, donkey milk is a fringe tidbit they'd rather keep hush-hush. Whether it truly makes tofu silkier or is just another palace superstition remains uncertain. Nevertheless, they guard it like contraband. One chef jokes, "If the emperor found out we're sneaking donkey milk around the palace, we'd be scrubbing floors for a decade." The group laughs, but there's an uneasy note in their voices. Your attention drifts to a series of odd diagrams pinned to a wooden panel. You see sketches of tofu blocks shaped like fish, complete with intricately carved scales, or pressed flat to resemble thin slices of marbled meat. Notes in the margins mention flavor infusions, chili oil with star anise, mushroom paste for umami, sweet bean sauce for color. Looking at the sketches feels like peering into an artist's portfolio. Who knew tofu could be this glamorous? You catch the tail end of a discussion about how the tofu should be plated. One cook insists on plating it in a spiral to evoke a mythical dragon's tail. Another advocates for arranging it as concentric circles, symbolizing harmony between the emperor and his subjects. Historians still argue whether these symbolic presentations had any real impact on diplomatic relations. The head chef mutters dryly, "But I assure you, they at least impressed the ladies of the court." A spark of humor flickers in her eyes. Even as she deadpans the line, you sense a quiet pride in how these presentations could sway hearts and minds, even if just for a moment at mealtime. Suddenly, there's a muted commotion from the hallway. Everyone goes silent, ears pricked. After a few seconds, the noise subsides, a couple of palace guards talking too loudly, perhaps. The head chef exhales. "All right, back to it," she commands, and the clandestine meeting resumes. They debate how to keep the tofu's shape intact without sacrificing that melt-in-your-mouth texture. Someone suggests borrowing a technique from potters, letting the curd set in specially designed molds that vibrate subtly, an idea as outlandish as it is intriguing. Another suggests layering tofu sheets with paper, thin slices of preserved vegetables for added flavor. It's a bizarre vision, like a tofu lamination process, but no one dismisses it outright. In this secret enclave, every idea is worth at least a passing consideration. A younger chef timidly raises her hand. "What if we use wine lees to marinate the tofu? It'll take on that rich, fermented aroma. Could pair well with sweet sauces." The group exchanges glances. Then the head chef nods, scribbling a note on the bamboo slip. It's as if they're collecting a catalogue of wild notions, any one of which might evolve into the next star dish. You sense an undercurrent of excitement tempered by caution. They can't just experiment openly. Failures are expensive, and word of a kitchen disaster can spread through palace gossip like wildfire. A fleeting thought crosses your mind. Are these chefs effectively culinary spies? They operate in the shadows, trading recipes and techniques with an urgency that suggests competition beyond mere personal pride. You recall hearing rumors that noble houses sometimes planted culinary observers in the palace, hoping to snatch the next groundbreaking recipe before it hit the emperor's table. Perhaps that's why everything here feels so cloak and dagger. No one wants to be the person who accidentally leaks the emperor's soon-to-be favorite dish. Amid all the hush and intrigue, a brief comedic moment unfolds. One chef glances around nervously and whispers, "Donkey milk aside, do we have to mention the—" Instantly, half the room shushes him. The head chef narrows her eyes, her expression a silent warning. Whether it's an even stranger ingredient or a cooking method bordering on taboo, you can't tell, but the tension is palpable. These palace kitchens clearly operate on a need-to-know basis, and you, dear intruder, definitely don't need to know. At length, the meeting winds down. The head chef glides around the table, extinguishing some of the lanterns. A hush falls, and she thanks everyone for their discretion. Another mainstream fact emerges in her closing remarks. The Tang Dynasty's reputation for opulent feasts owed much to chefs who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often without recognition, ensuring every grand occasion felt like a revelation. "If we succeed," she murmurs, "the emperor will praise our artistry. But if we fail, no one will ever hear of these foolish attempts." When she finally notices you, there's no alarm in her eyes, just an appraising curiosity. Perhaps she assumes you're some minor official. With a small nod, she motions you toward the door, as if acknowledging you've seen enough. You slip out into the corridor again, the thrill of secrecy coursing through you. The hush of the hallway envelops you, and you pause, letting the cool air drift over your warm cheeks. Behind you, you sense the chefs quietly dispersing, each of them returning to their stations with hearts and minds brimming with new, stealthy innovations. As you continue your midnight exploration, you can't shake the feeling that the palace kitchens are alive, an ever-moving tapestry of creativity, ambition, and a dash of quiet rebellion. If tofu can be molded into so many surprising forms, who's to say what else might be cooking in these secret chambers? Every footstep you take seems to reverberate with possibilities, each whisper in the corridor hinting at another bold idea waiting to be tested. And in the Tang Dynasty, where boundaries blur between the practical and the enchanted, there's no limit to what these palace chefs might concoct next, all in the name of delighting the emperor and further cementing the empire's culinary legend. You drift through more winding corridors until the muffled clamor of voices and clinking dishes draws you toward a large, domed hall. The moment you step inside, your breath catches in your throat. The place is awash in lamplight, shimmering silk draperies, and row after row of elaborate serving tables, each one laden with intricately shaped tofu creations. It's as if you've stumbled upon a secret gallery exhibit where the medium is bean curd. Under other circumstances, you might burst out laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. Here, however, the chefs and attendants move around these displays with reverence, as though each tofu sculpture were a priceless artifact. You circle around, marveling at the outlandish banquet displays. One table shows tofu meticulously carved into lotus flowers, petals dyed pale pink with beet juice, the centers dotted with mustard seeds that look like pollen. Another table offers tofu birds, perched on branches made of spun sugar, their beaks fashioned from slivers of carrot. Everywhere you look, there's a flourish of color and form, reminiscent of a flamboyant parade. You half expect these tofu critters to burst into song at any moment. To your left, a tall, slender chef wearing a crimson robe directs a pair of apprentices. He's pointing to a row of tofu figurines arranged on a wide platter. You look closer and realize they depict an entire mythical scene. Dragons, phoenixes, and swirling clouds, all shaped from tofu so refined it appears translucent. The chef prods one of the figurines gently, checking its stability, then exhales in relief when it doesn't topple over. "Careful now," he says. "We don't want the emperor to see a headless dragon." You stifle a smile, picturing the emperor's reaction to a collapsed tofu monster. A few steps away, you come across a display meant to resemble a lively fishing village. Silken tofu slices have been sculpted into fish that literally glisten, thanks to a translucent glaze brushed over them. Seaweed stands in for nets, while tiny tofu boats bob in a shallow basin of lightly salted broth. One mainstream historical fact you recall: during the Tang Dynasty, banquets could boast hundreds of dishes, with each course more extravagant than the last. Witnessing this display, you see how that reputation for over-the-top feasting isn't just rumor. It's an art form, part competition, part spectacle, part culinary performance. An attendant, noticing your amazement, steps closer to explain. "This is the emperor's personal favorite display for visiting dignitaries," she says in a hush, "to show we can mimic life itself through tofu." She sounds proud, and rightly so. You'd be proud too if you spent hours crafting a tofu crane that can stand on one leg without toppling over. Another attendant joins her, whispering that in a previous banquet, they accidentally added too much ginger to one of the glazes, turning the fish sculptures an odd orange hue. The emperor thought they looked sunburned, she says, chuckling at the memory. You move along to a table piled with tofu that's been layered in multiple hues, white, green, and pale pink. At first, it looks like a pastel mosaic. A small sign in calligraphy reads, "Inspired by the Western regions." The mention of foreign influence sparks your interest. One quirky tidbit you overhear is that the chefs sometimes used powdered saffron, obtained through distant trade routes, to tint parts of the tofu bright yellow. Whether saffron complements tofu's flavor or they just used it for the color is anyone's guess. But in this hall, aesthetics are at least as important as taste. Off to one side, you find a trio of palace musicians sitting quietly, testing a few soft melodies on traditional string instruments. Though they aren't playing at full volume, their gentle plucking adds an almost magical undertone, as if you've wandered into a realm between dream and reality. You notice a few palace officials milling about, discreetly checking the displays. You can't help but wonder if they're trying to glean a hint of the emperor's next command, or gauge how well tonight's banquet might impress foreign envoys. Historians still argue whether these dazzling tofu showcases served purely as culinary art or doubled as political theater. One school of thought claims the emperor used these ostentatious feasts to broadcast the empire's wealth and sophistication, essentially saying, "Look at all we can do with a simple soybean." Others insist it was simply a hallmark of Tang culture, where celebrating creativity, in poetry or in cooking, was woven into the imperial identity. Whatever the truth, the results speak for themselves. Wandering among tofu dragons and fish that glisten with improbable realism, you sense these displays have the power to enchant almost anyone. A minor commotion near the corner draws your attention. An older chef scolds an apprentice who appears to have spilled a tray of tiny tofu blossoms onto the floor. The apprentice looks ready to vanish into thin air from shame, but the older chef quickly helps him gather the salvageable pieces, muttering something about how, least they didn't land in donkey milk this time. The boy manages a weak smile. It's a small comedic moment in an otherwise immaculate space, living proof that even among these master artisans, accidents lurk around every corner. You pause at a table featuring tofu jewels. Each piece is molded into a faceted shape, dyed in pastel hues like precious stones in a royal treasury. Jade, green tofu squares rest beside garnet, red cubes tinted with a dash of chili oil. There's even a plate of pearlescent tofu lumps that catch the lantern light in a subtle shimmer. A fringe tidbit you overhear from a passing attendant. Sometimes the palace kitchens experimented with actual gold dust, sprinkled atop tofu, meant for the emperor's table, a luxurious flourish typically reserved for the most lavish celebrations. Whether that was actually safe to eat is a question no one dared to ask out loud. Caught in the swirl of excitement, you barely notice the half-dozen junior officials gathering near the center of the hall. They exchange murmurs about the upcoming banquet, speculating on which display will earn the emperor's highest praise. You catch snippets of conversation. Has partial to seafood illusions? No, the emperor's always been fascinated by mythical beasts. And then, that phoenix tofu last month nearly made me cry. It was so perfect. You realize these events are not just about feeding the emperor. They're stagecraft, each display vying for the starring role in an unforgettable night of culinary theater. As you wander through the hall, you can't help but notice the synergy between the cooks and the artists, the attendants, and the palace brass. Everyone has a part to play, whether it's carefully painting tofu with a tinted glaze or ensuring no uninvited guests wander off with secrets of the next big tofu masterpiece. Two official scribes stand in a corner, meticulously documenting each display. Perhaps they're recording it for posterity, or maybe preparing a report for the emperor himself. When you pass by, you glance at their scrolls, noticing detailed sketches of the tofu creations alongside columns of commentary. It's a level of documentation you'd expect for diplomatic treaties, not dinner. A sudden ripple of excitement travels through the room as a herald enters, quietly announcing that the emperor may visit the hall soon to preview the displays. Immediately, attendants scurry to straighten tablecloths, re-fluff tofu birds, and ensure not a single garnish is out of place. The atmosphere shifts from hushed wonder to a quiet tension, like stage actors waiting for the curtain to rise. You feel the electric buzz in the air. No one wants a single tofu sculpture to falter under the emperor's scrutiny. In the bustle, someone nearly bumps into you with a large bamboo tray holding an ornate tofu phoenix. You catch yourself, arms raised in alarm, and the person apologizes in a frantic whisper. Sorry! If this breaks, I might as well jump into the lotus pond. You politely wave off the apology, relieved that tragedy was averted. The phoenix remains upright, its tofu feathers shimmering under the lanterns. You decide to retreat to the sidelines, not wanting to be in the direct path when the emperor arrives, if he does at all. Tang emperors had a reputation for unpredictability, so the entire palace is on perpetual standby. Glancing around, you absorb the last few details of this mesmerizing scene, the hush of anticipation, the flicker of lamplight reflecting off glossy tofu surfaces, the pride shimmering in the eyes of chefs who've poured their souls into these ephemeral, edible sculptures. In these moments, you truly grasp the power of these daring attempts. Tofu isn't just food, it's a blank canvas on which these visionary artisans paint the empire's story of abundance, artistry, and boundless possibility. Before you slip away, you briefly consider hiding behind a pillar to watch the emperor's reaction. But given your current streak of covert observations, maybe it's wise not to push your luck. With one final glance at a plate of tofu, crabs, that look almost too real to be plant-based, you step back into the corridor, letting the soft glow of the banquet hall recede behind you. In this kingdom of edible illusions, you've witnessed how tofu can be transformed into something as splendid and awe-inspiring as any Tang Dynasty tapestry, proving that sometimes the simplest ingredients harbor the greatest potential for wonder. Slipping outside the palace walls, you find yourself walking along a moonlit pathway that leads to the bustling city beyond. Even at this late hour, Chang'an, capital of the Tang Dynasty, pulses with life. The distant hum of voices and the clatter of carts grow louder, guiding you toward the famous night markets. Before long, the quiet grandeur of the imperial compound gives way to a lively tangle of merchants, customers, and curious bystanders sniffing out late night snacks. A gust of spiced air hits you the moment you pass under the tall, wooden arch that marks the market entrance. Here it's a carnival of scents, the sizzling perfume of grilled lamb skewers, the tangy sweetness of candied fruits, the earthy aroma of mushrooms frying in sesame oil. Amid the kaleidoscope of stalls, You notice something that tugs on your newly refined tofu radar, tables displaying blocks of bean curd, each boasting a different color and texture. One is a deep brown, marinated in soy sauce for days. Another is flecked with herbs you can't quite identify. You hadn't realized how multifaceted tofu could be outside the palace walls. Yet here it is, in the hands of street vendors, just as experimental, albeit in a humbler form. A short round-faced vendor calls out to passers-by, waving a scoop of chili sauce in the air. "Come, try my spicy tofu!" Guaranteed to jolt you awake better than a donkey's bray. You stifle a laugh at the odd reference, but it does pique your curiosity. The vendor spots your interest and beckons you closer. He points proudly to a wok of tofu cubes sizzling in a fiery red sauce. Famous in the western provinces. He says, "We make it with peppercorns from Sichuan, guaranteed to make your tongue tingle." You recall that the Tang Dynasty oversaw a vast empire connected by robust trade networks, meaning spices from far-flung regions often made their way into local markets. Indeed, that's one mainstream historical fact. Chang'an was a true cosmopolitan hub, absorbing influences from every direction. You ask for a small taste, and the vendor obliges, plopping a cube of tofu into a paper-thin wrapper, then offering it to you with a wide grin. You pop it into your mouth, and, wow, the heat is immediate, dancing across your taste buds like miniature fireworks. Yet the tofu's soft center provides a soothing contrast, taming the spice just enough that you can appreciate the burst of flavors. Historians still argue whether Sichuan peppercorns first gained popularity during early Tang or if they were a later addition. The vendor remarks, tossing the peppercorns flamboyantly into his wok. It seems everyone in this city, from palace chefs to street vendors, loves to share a tidbit of culinary lore. Further along, you catch sight of another stall, this one displaying tofu in unusual shapes. Thin sheets, twisted into ribbon, like strips, and round patties flecked with something green. You strike up a conversation with the young woman behind the counter, while blends seaweed from the eastern coast into our tofu. She explains, gesturing at a woven basket of dried seaweed. Gives it a briny edge perfect for soup. A fringe tidbit you pick up. Some coastal vendors claim that soaking tofu in salt water for hours preps it to better absorb sauces later. Whether this is proven or just a local myth remains fuzzy, but she believes it wholeheartedly. You sample a tiny slice. It has an oceanic whisper that's unlike anything you've tasted before. As you wander, your ears pick up fragments of gossip about the palace. They say the emperor's next banquet will feature tofu shaped like dancing horses. Impossible. No one can carve bean curd that delicately. Another person scoffs. Have you seen the donkey milk fiasco? And then lowers his voice, as though discussing a state secret. You can't help but smile. Word travels fast. Even the common folk seem aware of the palace's tofu obsessions, and the questionable ingredients used to achieve them. Every corner you turn reveals another regional twist. From the northernmost provinces comes a hearty, firm tofu perfect for hot pot. Steaming vats of broth bubble away, luring crowds who huddle around the large communal pot. Each person dips in slices of tofu that soak up the flavors like a sponge. Someone cracks a joke. "This tofu's so good, it might sprout legs and run off before we can eat it." Everyone laughs, and you join in, feeling an odd kinship with these strangers united by a shared love of flavorful comfort food. Nearby, a traveling merchant from the southwestern territories flaunts tofu infused with jungle herbs. He claims it detoxifies the body and wards off evil spirits. Bold statements that draw skeptical glances, but also eager customers, just a pinch of these crushed leaves. He says, opening a small pouch that smells faintly of mint and pepper, "And you'll never have another sleepless night." You raise an eyebrow, suspecting it's a marketing ploy. Still, the line at his stall suggests people are willing to believe. Or at least they're curious enough to try. Between stalls, you weave through throngs of shoppers bargaining for everything from porcelain vases to embroidered tunics. Torches flicker overhead, illuminating the swirling haze of smoke from open-air grills. Musicians strum lively tunes on lutes, while performers juggle clay pots to entertain the crowd. In the midst of this carnival-like atmosphere, you can't help but notice how seamlessly tofu fits in, bridging regional identities under one common staple. It's like a unifying canvas upon which every local tradition paints its own signature. A group of foreign traders stands near a large cart, sampling various fried tofu snacks. Their embroidered robes and multi-lingual chatter hint that they've come a long way, probably along the Silk Road. One man, tall with sun-weathered skin, exclaims in delight after biting into a crispy tofu skewer dipped in chili oil. He motions for his companions to try it, muttering praise in a language you don't recognize. A local guide explains that this chili style likely arrived from the southwestern frontier before the recipe spread to other parts of the empire. You witness a living tapestry of culinary exchange, all centered around a humble soybean curd. Pausing near a quieter stall, you spot a stack of what looks like tofu, except it's completely black. Intrigued, you ask the vendor what it is. "That's fermented tofu," she replies, "We'll soak it in brine mixed with charred leaves and spices, then age it for weeks." You hazard a sniff, pungent and sour, yet somehow mouth-watering. She offers you a tiny piece on a toothpick. The taste is intense and funky, reminiscent of strong cheese. You can't help but think of someone biting into blue cheese for the first time. Pure shock followed by slow, curious appreciation. A comedic image flashes in your mind. You imagine a modern dinner party with a cheese board, except it's full of these black tofu squares, delighting some guests and sending others fleeing with scrunched-up noses. In a lull between vendors, you catch yourself feeling surprisingly comforted by the swirl of sensory overload. Yes, the city is brash and chaotic, but it also has a vibrant pulse that makes you feel alive, as though you're part of an epic tapestry. And all the while, tofu remains at the center, shifting from shape to shape, flavor to flavor, reflecting the empire's vast cultural mosaic. Eventually, you spot a small tea shop down a side alley, a haven from the boisterous crowd. Slipping inside, you find a cozy corner table. The shopkeeper greets you warmly, offering a pot of floral tea and a small dish of tofu skin rolls stuffed with vegetables. You take a seat, exhaling a contented sigh as you sip the steaming beverage. The rolls are delicate, with a slight chewiness that pairs beautifully with the fragrant tea. It's a far cry from the fiery tofu you sampled earlier or the sweet, candied tofu you saw in the palace. Yet it's no less impressive, a reminder that tofu's versatility extends to quiet corners as much as grand feasts. While you nibble, you reflect on everything you've seen. The Tang Dynasty is famous for its cultural synthesis, weaving influences from the Silk Road into its domestic tapestry. And tofu, surprisingly enough, is right at the heart of that creative exchange. Each region adds its own twist, whether it's Sichuan peppercorns or coastal seaweed, southwestern herbs, or northern broth. The result is an ever-evolving spectrum of flavors, methods, and presentations. Maybe that's tofu's real magic, the ability to adapt, to absorb whatever essence a region imparts, to transform yet remain comfortingly familiar. Your eyelids feel a bit heavy from the day's or night's adventures, but you're not quite done yet. Outside, the marketplace continues to hum with energy, and you sense there's more to discover, more hidden corners of Tang-era cuisine, more stories unfolding in these lantern-lit alleys. Pushing back your chair, you finish the last sip of tea and step back into the night air. The tang of spices wraps around you, accompanied by distant laughter and the soft plucking of a lute. Tofu's transformation isn't just a palace affair, it's an ongoing dialogue between regions, traditions, and curious minds. And you, intrepid wanderer, are now part of that story, soaking in every colorful gust of flavor the Tang world has to offer. After your late night tour of Chang'an's vibrant tofu stalls, you decide to follow a faint echo of drums and cheering that seems to drift from the far end of the market district. Curious, you wend through narrow alleys until you come upon a makeshift stage lit by torches. A sizable crowd gathers around, huddled in excited clusters. As you slip through the throng, you spot two groups of cooks on opposite ends of the stage, each wielding cleavers, ladles, and, of course, heaps of tofu. This, you quickly realize, is a head-to-head cooking showdown. For a moment, you wonder if you've stepped onto the set of a Tang Dynasty reality show. On one side, you see a tall, confident chef with hair knotted high and a fierce determination in his eyes. On the other side, a slightly older woman wearing a practical apron studded with small pockets, from which she plucks spices and dried herbs with lightning efficiency. The crowd parts just enough that you can observe bowls of marinade, sizzling woks, and tofu in every conceivable state, cubed, mashed, pressed into sheets, even ground into a paste. Over the excited chatter, a local performer with a booming voice explains the rules. Each cook must produce a tofu dish that dazzles the taste buds and demonstrates an innovative twist. The winner isn't just showered with applause. Bragging rights in this culinary, obsessed city are no small prize. People are betting copper coins and whispering personal biases. Some claim the tall chef is famed for his creative use of chili oil, while others insist the older woman once served a dish so authentic that an official wept with nostalgia. Intrigued, you wedge yourself near the front for a better look. Sparks of rivalry fly between the two contestants. The tall chef smirks, flicking his cleaver in a showy arc as if to say, "Watch and learn." The older woman responds with a raised eyebrow and a wry grin, drawing laughs from the spectators. Someone behind you quips that the tension on stage is thicker than overcooked tofu. The comment makes you snort, earning you a few side glances, but you're not alone. Others titter at the pun. Soon, a gong sounds, and both chefs set to work. The tall chef begins by slicing tofu into wafer, thin sheets, layering them with a marinade that looks suspiciously dark and pungent. You crane your neck to catch a whiff. There's vinegar, soy sauce, and perhaps a hint of sesame oil. Meanwhile, the older woman quickly grinds herbs in a mortar, mixing them into a pale paste she'll likely blend with tofu. You see flecks of mint and chili, an odd pairing that might produce a cool, heat contrast. The crowd, half entranced and half rowdy, whoops whenever a particularly dramatic cooking move is displayed. A comedic moment ensues when the tall chef attempts a flamboyant flip of his tofu in the wok, only to have a piece go sailing off into the crowd. A startled onlooker catches it, awkwardly takes a bite, and declares, "Needs more salt." The spectators roar with laughter. Even the older woman nearly drops her mortar from giggling, but she quickly recovers, returning to her own creation, making sure not to lose precious seconds in the comedic uproar. You catch snatches of conversation around you. Some folks whisper that these impromptu kitchen duels are a proud tradition in Chang'an, going back generations. One mainstream historical fact is that cooking competitions were sometimes hosted by wealthy families or local guilds, eager to show off their in-house chefs and impress visiting dignitaries. Another person argues that such contests might have started even earlier, with traveling tropes setting up taste battles to entertain the masses. Historians still argue whether these rivalries had official royal endorsement, or if they sprouted from grassroots fervor. A mustached bystander remarks with a scholarly nod. Whatever the case, the crowd is clearly enthralled. As time ticks on, the older woman unveils a fringe tidbit, a small vial of fermented plum juice she claims can mimic the tang of meat when mixed with the right ratio of tofu and spice. She pours just a trickle into her pan, letting the fragrant steam billow upward. The audience gasps dramatically, as if a grand secret has been unveiled. The tall chef responds with flair, tossing in a handful of Sichuan peppercorns, turning the tofu a bright red as it sizzles. You swear you see tears in the eyes of a few front-row spectators from the pepper's intensity. Both chefs plate their creations with dazzling speed. The tall chef's final presentation is a tofu tower drenched in a glossy sauce, garnished with chopped peanuts and green onion curls. The older woman, for her part, arranges her tofu in delicate rolls, each stuffed with a combination of herbs, chili, and that fermented plum concoction. The performers call for quiet, and two judges step up, one a middle-aged woman who looks like she knows her way around a kitchen, the other a refined gentleman with the air of a local official. They each sample the tofu with solemn faces, as though deciding the fate of an empire. What follows is an excruciating silence. Then the female judge smiles, praising the tall chef's sauce for its bold flavors. However, she also praises the older woman's remarkable layering of sweet and tang. The official nods vigorously, and you sense the decision is close. Finally, he points his fan at the older woman, declaring her the winner by a hair. A collective cheer erupts, and the two chefs exchange a curt bow. Formal enough, though you sense a friendly rivalry lingers beneath it, like a traveling fair packing up its tents. The makeshift stage is quickly dismantled, and the crowd disperses with excited chatter about the next cooking duel. You linger to congratulate the older woman, who appears pleasantly stunned by her victory. She reveals that her marinade ratio was just a hunch, a spur-of-the-moment guess. "Sometimes you just have to trust your nose," she says, wiggling her fingers at her nostrils as if they hold magical powers. She offers you a small taste of her winning sauce. You accept eagerly, and the burst of tang and spice on your tongue feels like an encore performance. Off to the side, a group of cooks rehashes the highlights. One of them jokes about challenging the palace chefs next. "I hear they're using donkey milk these days." He adds with a smirk, the thought of a street chef waltzing into the imperial kitchen for a tofu face-off is both hilarious and oddly thrilling. Could it happen? Probably not without a serious backstage pass. But you can imagine the comedic chaos if it did. Gradually, the crowd thins, and the street grows quieter. A few late-night vendors remain open, hawking sweet rolls and hot tea for those who want to keep the party going. You reflect on how tofu, once dismissed by some as a mere peasant food, has risen to become the centerpiece of fierce culinary competitions. Its adaptability, ironically, is what makes it a prime contestant. It can be fiery, sweet, briny, or earthy, depending on the hands that shape it. Finally, you step away from the dying embers of the torches, still tasting the lingering burn of chili on your lips. The night sky above Chang'an feels closer somehow, as if even the stars might be curious about these simmering rivalries. You realize you've stumbled into a world where tofu is not just a dish. It's a point of pride, a reason to gather and cheer, a symbol of the Tang Dynasty's creative spark. And as you wander off into the twinkling darkness, you can't help but wonder what new tofu marvel awaits around the next corner. Or in the next midnight duel, you slip down a quieter street, the tang of chili still dancing on your tongue from the cooking duel. The city lights soften here, and the once raucous night feels calmer. Just when you think your tofu-filled adventures might pause, you catch an unexpected sight: a cluster of small stalls, each illuminated by flickering lanterns. Above them hangs a faded banner emblazoned with something that roughly translates to Bazaar Bean Bazaar. Intrigued, you wander closer. At first glance, the stalls appear similar to the ones you've visited before. But then you notice they're pushing the tofu concept to an extreme. Each stall has its own spin on unusual tofu ingredients, additives that seem borderline alchemical, used to stretch the boundaries of what bean curd can become. One vendor, an older man with a silver beard and a wide grin, waves you over and proudly announces, "Here, we test the limits!" If you can imagine it, we've probably tried mixing it into tofu. He points to a row of clay pots that each hold a different solution. One is filled with a murky green liquid, another pitch black. A third has suspicious flecks floating in it, reminiscent of dried petals or maybe crushed shells. You lean in, half anxious, half curious. "This one," the man says, tapping the green pot, "is donkey milk mixed with a special mountain herb." He lowers his voice theatrically. Gives tofu a velvety texture. If you don't mind the smell, you stifle a giggle. Apparently donkey milk is truly the talk of the town. But here they're going beyond just donkey dairy, blending it with who knows what to achieve a tofu so soft it allegedly dissolves on your tongue. The man ladles out a small sample for you to try. You brace yourself, because let's be honest, donkey milk tofu isn't exactly what you'd see on a modern menu. Yet the taste surprises you. It's creamy, almost like a tangy custard. You're about to compliment him when he adds, "We also used a pinch of snail mucus for better binding." You nearly choke. He laughs heartily, patting you on the back. "Don't worry,
It's perfectly safe.
or, well, historians still argue whether it was wise for Tang chefs to include snail-based additives in food. But hey, no one's kicked the bucket from it recently." His eyes twinkle with mischief. You can't decide if he's being serious or just messing with you, maybe both. Moving on, you spot an adjacent stall showcasing what looks like tofu marinated in an inky solution. Thick, ominous, almost like tar. You give the vendor a questioning look. "Oh, that's black garlic and fermented bean paste," she explains. "We leave the tofu blocks submerged for a fortnight. The result is a tofu so pungent you could use it to ward off evil spirits. Care to try?" You hesitate, remembering your nosie's reaction to strong cheese or fish sauce. But, hey, you're on this bizarre tofu journey. Taking a tiny nibble, you're bombarded with a tidal wave of umami. It's salty, deep, and just a bit funky, yet not entirely unpleasant. A comedic thought crosses your mind: if you set this out at a party, half the guests would swoon in delight, the other half would run screaming. A few steps away, a younger cook gestures excitedly at jars lined up like prized trophies. Each jar has a different label: pickled lotus root essence, crushed ant powder, aged bamboo ash. He claims all of these can be used as coagulants or flavor enhancers in tofu. You do a double take. "Did he say powder?" He nods enthusiastically. It's said to add a slight earthy note to the tofu, and it's rich in nutrients. Perfect for the adventurous eater. You can't help but grin at the audacity. A fringe tidbit you recall is that certain insect-based recipes have popped up throughout history, though rarely in mainstream cuisine. Yet here they are, in proud display, championed as the next big tofu craze. This mini-market is more than just a carnival of eccentric tastes. There's an undercurrent of genuine craftsmanship and experimentation. You notice that each stall meticulously records its recipes on bamboo slips or paper scrolls, referencing them with studious care. A short, bespectacled woman at one stall explains that the Tang Dynasty's love for experimentation wasn't limited to the palace. "We don't have imperial budgets," she says, stirring a pot of tofu curds gently, "so we get creative with local resources. Sometimes that means snails and donkey milk. Other times it's ground seashells or oddball herbs we trade for at the southwestern borders." She glances around conspiratorially. "My biggest fear? A palace official strolling by and stealing our secrets." Imagine them claiming snail-infused tofu as a royal invention. She waves a ladle in mock outrage. You laugh, envisioning a comedic tussle between imperial chefs and these street-savvy tofu wizards. You continue exploring, passing a display of tofu blocks embedded with bright red chili peppers, laced with golden swirls of egg yolk. The vendor calls it sunfire tofu, claiming it's both spicy and rich. You might taste a faint bitterness. He warns, that's from the crushed ginger root and powdered lime we add. Some say it's an acquired taste, but once you acquire it, you can't stop. As if to punctuate his point, he offers a free sample to a passing shopper, who instantly begins fanning her mouth and gulping for air.
That's the sunfire,
He says, triumphantly. The shopper, through teary eyes, manages a thumbs up, then waddles off in search of water, or possibly a second helping. Wandering among these stalls, you pick up on a deeper truth. While some of these, bizarre additives might seem outlandish, many are rooted in local traditions or folk beliefs about health and flavor. One mainstream historical fact is that Tang Dynasty folk medicine often intersected with culinary practices, leading people to experiment with everything from dried deer antlers to powdered pearls, hoping for health benefits as well as taste. Of course, not all these attempts were successful, and many remain purely anecdotal, yet the spirit of pushing boundaries, of turning tofu into a vessel for wild possibilities, still fuels the city's late-night cooking culture. Another comedic gem presents itself when you overhear a vendor complaining that he tried making tofu with, of all things, fermented durian dyes, that famously pungent fruit. Let's just say we almost had to quarantine the entire stall, he mutters, rolling his eyes. I'm pretty sure the smell seeped into the cobblestones. The image of unsuspecting pedestrians reeling from durian, tofu fumes is enough to make you snort with laughter. You'd have loved to see the testers' faces when they took that first bite. By now, your senses are a swirl of contradictory aromas: snail, laced creaminess, stinging chili, musky fermented bean sauce, and the lingering trace of donkey milk tang. Yet somehow, it all weaves together into a tapestry that belongs exclusively to the Tang Dynasty's adventurous spirit. Even as your stomach tenses at the thought of crushed ant powder, you can't help but admire the sheer audacity. The cooks here aren't just making tofu. They're flipping it inside out, turning it into a canvas for the empire's strangest ingredients and boldest claims. Eventually, you step away from the bizarre being bizarre, your mind abuzz with these unorthodox recipes. The moon hangs low now, hinting that dawn might be closer than you realize. A gentle breeze drifts by, momentarily cleansing your nose of the pungent mosaic of scents. You can't help but smile. Tonight's, or rather, this entire night, turned early morning, has been an unfolding tapestry of tofu's endless mutability. From donkey milk to snail mucus, from black garlic brine to ant powder, you've seen how far people are willing to go to elevate, or sometimes just shock with, this ancient bean curd. As you leave the stalls behind, you suspect you'll be dreaming of donkey milk tofu dancing in swirling black garlic sauce, maybe even being chased by an army of snail, shell-laden ants. And honestly, that wouldn't be the weirdest thing you've experienced tonight. With your heart light and your senses thoroughly dazzled, you carry onward, excited for whatever strange wonders the Tang night will offer next. Pressing deeper into the winding streets of Chang'an, you find yourself drawn toward a cluster of low-built academic halls where scholars in long robes move about, clutching scrolls and muttering under their breath about the finer points of philosophy, poetry, and, surprisingly, food. Flickering lanterns cast dancing shadows on the brick walls. Now that the initial bustle of night markets and bizarre tofu concoctions has receded into the background, you sense a different kind of intensity in the air, one fueled not by sizzling woks, but by heated intellectual debate. You slip inside a modest courtyard, just in time to overhear a small gathering of scholars hashing out the nature of tofu. Their voices echo off the ancient stone, creating an unintentional amphitheater effect. One scholar, white, bearded and leaning on a carved walking stick, furrows his brow, proclaiming that tofu is a respectable dish, known since the Han Dynasty, if not earlier. Another, with ink-stained sleeves, counters that some texts credit the Wei or Jin periods for tofu's mainstream acceptance, or perhaps attribute it to travelers from lands far beyond the empire's borders. You snicker quietly, thinking, who knew a block of bean curd could spark such fiery debate? A younger scholar pipes up, rubbing his temples as though wrestling with an important riddle. Historians still argue whether the earliest reference to tofu appeared in a medical text or in an agricultural treatise. He gestures to a scroll in his hand. Some claim it's mentioned in the essential skills for the people, while others insist the text we're referencing is a later forgery. The group collectively groans. Apparently, even the most meticulous scholars can't pin down the exact moment Tofu tiptoed into recorded history. Yet that uncertainty only seems to inflame their passion. You shuffle closer, mindful not to interrupt. The courtyard stone benches are strewn with rolled-up bamboo slips and half-open books, many of them scribbled with notes on soybean varieties, fermentation methods, and historical commentary. As you carefully pick your way around, the faint scent of old ink mingles with a lingering whiff of pungent cooking spices. Someone nearby must be enjoying a midnight snack. One mainstream historical fact leaps out at you when you catch sight of a large mural on the courtyard wall. It depicts Emperor Taizong receiving tribute from various kingdoms, each offering their finest goods. Tucked in a corner of the painting, a small crate marked with the characters for bean curd suggests that even the act of presenting tofu to the emperor might have been a recognized custom. Before you can reflect further, the older scholar slams his walking stick on the ground. "Nonsense!" he barks, glaring at one of his peers. Tofu was never intended to be a mere curiosity for the wealthy. It was a practical source of nutrition for commoners and monks. Another scholar, possibly stung by the rebuke, retorts, "But look at the palace kitchens now. They're transforming tofu into phoenixes and dragons. Surely that implies a long-standing, regal interest in bean curd." The older man scoffs. Or it just proves the emperor has a quirky palate. The group erupts in a mix of laughter and exasperated sighs, and you hide your own grin behind a polite cough. You spot a side table where two younger scholars are hunched over an ornate brass brazier, warming their hands. They look like they're on the fringe of the main debate, perhaps novices or simply too shy to pipe up. One flips through a slim volume, softly summarizing its contents. According to this text, tofu was considered beneficial in balancing qi, especially when mixed with certain herbs. She shrugs, glancing at her companion. Could be part of the reason Buddhists embraced it, meatless protein and all. The companion nods, adding a quirky tidbit. And if the donkey milk rumors are true, maybe certain secret factions believed that combining tofu with bizarre additives would grant longevity or spiritual insight. They both giggle, possibly picturing a donkey, led march toward enlightenment. The older voices rise again, capturing your attention. A wiry scholar with a sharp chin is waving a scroll like a sword. "Behold, I have here a recipe from the year such, and such that includes snail slime as a binding agent for soybean curds." This triggers a ripple of repulsed fascination. So it's not just donkey milk that plagues our gastronomic record. Someone quips, eliciting a round of polite chuckles. The wiry scholar continues in a triumphant tone. "It proves that these strange concoctions have deeper roots in folk tradition than we realize." Another retorts, "Or maybe it was just a single weirdo who thought snails had magical thickening powers." Laughter, again, but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Each snippet of evidence could shift the entire timeline and significance of tofu in Tang culture. Curious about their sources, you peer at the scroll being brandished. The calligraphy is too tiny and intricate from where you stand, but you catch references to herbal listings and cooking notes. The debate intensifies when a round-faced scholar jabs his finger at a line in another text. "Hair!" It calls tofu the food of immortals, hinting that it came from an alchemist's pursuit of eternal life. The older, white, bearded man laughs so hard he nearly doubles over. "Food of immortals. The only immortal thing about tofu is the smell if you let it ferment too long." Everyone cracks a grin, though some keep scanning the text with genuine curiosity. You drift toward the courtyard's edge, where a shelf holds multiple scrolls and books, each labeled with elaborate titles referencing tofu's mystical or practical aspects. Some discuss how tofu's mild flavor is a perfect canvas for absorbing sauces and marinades. Others delve into theories that tofu was once used exclusively in monastic communities. Flipping through a random scroll, you find a line that translates roughly toy. In the Western Hills, a hermit with knowledge of donkey's milk discovered tofu's secret ephemeral nature. You barely stifle a laugh. This donkey milk keeps popping up like a comedic sidekick in tofu's origin story. In a lull between arguments, one scholar tries to steer the conversation toward a broader perspective. "Let's consider the real question," he says, pushing his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. "Is tofu a pillar of Tang Dynasty culinary identity, or just a side curiosity the palace latched onto for novelty?" The group falls silent for a moment, and you sense that each person in the courtyard has a different answer locked away. The older man eventually mutters, "It's both, probably. A common dish with noble aspirations. like a peasant's child who becomes a court official. Heads nod in tentative agreement. The hush deepens, and you imagine these scholars have circled this point countless times. The comedic tension of donkey milk and snail slime aside, what truly matters to them is understanding how tofu fits into the tapestry of Tang culture. One mainstream historical fact you recall is that the Tang Dynasty excelled at merging influences, be it through poetry, music, or trade goods. Tofu, with its ability to absorb flavors and adapt to different cooking styles, might just be the perfect emblem of that blend. Sensing the atmosphere soften, you quietly approach one of the novices. She turns, a bit startled, then smiles. "Did you come to learn about tofu's past?" she asks, almost shyly. You respond with a nod, admitting you've seen everything from donkey milk tofu in the palace to snail-laden experiments in the market. A hint of excitement flashes in her eyes. It's astounding, isn't it? All these layers of legend and practice. Each time we peel one back, we find another contradiction or half-legend waiting underneath. Overhearing your conversation, the wiry scholar leaps in. "Contradiction is the spice of scholarship," he proclaims, perhaps a bit too dramatically. "Without debate, we'd still be stuck chewing raw soybeans." He winks at you, then swishes away, presumably to rejoin the main circle. You glance back at the novices, trying not to grin too broadly. The older man raps his stick again, urging them to refocus. Another round of debates ensues, referencing everything from temple archives to foreign travelers' diaries that might mention tofu in passing. Eventually, the courtyard's lanterns burn low, and the scholars begin gathering their scrolls, still muttering about donkey milk origins, snail-based legends, and who deserves credit for first championing tofu. You decide to slip out while the night is still yours. As you pass under the courtyard gate, you can't help but marvel at the contrast. On one end of the city, you have rowdy cooking duels and bizarre bean markets. On this end, cluster of erudite scholars locked in intellectual battle over tofu's timeline and significance. Yet both worlds converge on the same question: what exactly is tofu to the Tang Dynasty, and how did it become such an obsession? Outside, the air feels cool against your cheeks, and the sky's first hints of dawn glow faintly along the horizon. Your mind swirls with images: donkey milk fiascos, snail slime theories, comedic spats over who invented bean curd. You realize these debates are less about right or wrong, and more about peeling back layers of history to see how a simple block of soybean curd became a cultural chameleon. A small smile creeps onto your face as you continue your midnight odyssey. In the shadowy alleys of Chang'an, even the quiet corners hum with scholarly fervor, and tofu, of all things, stands at the heart of the storm. Stepping away from the scholar's courtyard, you navigate a series of narrow streets leading toward the city's workshop district, a realm of tinkers, metalworkers, and inventors who, rumor has it, provide the palace kitchens with cutting-edge tools. By now, dawn is a silvery glimmer in the sky, but the air still carries the hushed magic of night. You pass small forges and carpentry sheds, each illuminated by the warm glow of coals or candles. There's a pleasant rhythm to the clank of hammers and the scrape of sharpening stones. Every so often, you catch the faint hiss of steam escaping from some contraption you can't quite see. Curiosity guides you to a large, open-air workshop ringed by stacks of wood and metal. Several artisans bustle about, directing their apprentices to measure, cut, and fit parts together. One corner is dedicated entirely to the creation of kitchenware, giant woks, specialized ladles, and, fascinatingly enough, devices that look suspiciously like tofu presses. You inch closer, wanting to observe these tech-tang tools in action. Two young apprentices lift a massive wooden frame fitted with a heavy stone slab, carefully lowering it onto a layer of cloth-wrapped soybean curds. The person supervising them, a wiry man in soot-stained robes, nods approvingly. "That press can apply steady, even pressure," he explains to no one in particular, though you're obviously eavesdropping. "We've incorporated counterweights that can be adjusted for different firmness levels." He taps the side of the frame. "Need a soft, silken tofu? Ease off a little. A firmer block for stir-fries. Crank it up." He gives a cocky grin, as though unveiling a military-grade secret. You move along the line of worktables, each showcasing a different mechanical marvel. One table holds a contraption with wooden gears interlocking around a cylindrical drum. A middle-aged artisan polishes the gears lovingly. "This," he says, catching your fascinated look, "is a tofu mill. It grinds soaked beans faster than a dozen men with mortar and pestle." A broad smile cracks his face. "Thanks to Tang-era gear engineering, you can produce gallons of soybean slurry in half the time." He points at the cunning arrangement of cogs and levers. We borrowed some ideas from water wheel designs used in irrigation. If you hook this up to a donkey, you can let the poor beast do all the heavy milling while you sip tea. You can't help but remember donkey milk, donkey labor. At some point, you suspect these animals might unionize in protest. As you edge around another workbench, a younger craftswoman beckons you over. She displays a newly forged metal knife that arcs in a half-moon shape with multiple parallel blades. Multi-blade slicer, she explains proudly, demonstrating how it can slice tofu into uniform strips in a single pass. No more uneven chunks or ragged edges, she adds with a wink. Historians still argue whether such advanced slicing implements first appeared in the Tang Dynasty or were adapted from earlier prototypes. But I've seen older references to multi-blade contraptions used for noodles, so who knows? Tofu's just the next frontier. The device glints menacingly in the lantern light, half kitchen tool, half medieval weapon. A subtle movement nearby draws your attention, a cart laden with rows of bamboo cylinders, each with a small vent near the top. The inventor overseeing them excitedly points to a spout at the bottom of one cylinder. Steam, infusion tofu maker, she announces, patting the top of the nearest bamboo tube. You pour in your soybean slurry here, add coagulant, and then let steam circulate through the vent. The result is a gently cooked curd, perfect for that silky texture everyone craves. We can even flavor the steam with spices or citrus peels. You raise an eyebrow, imagining the tang of orange-scented tofu. She nods, reading your expression. Yes, that's right. We're not messing around. If donkey milk's not cutting it, try steaming with plum blossoms. A comedic image flashes in your mind of donkey milk tofu infused with floral steam. If that doesn't sum up Tang culinary ambition, nothing will. Lingering in the workshop, you notice how each tool is meticulously designed to address a specific tofu, making challenge dryness, shape, speed of production, or flavor infusion. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. The Tang Dynasty was known for significant strides in machinery and engineering, from advanced clockworks to hydraulic, powered bellows in smelting operations. It's no leap to imagine that such ingenuity found its way into the culinary realm, especially for an empire obsessed with gastronomic innovation. You watch as a blacksmith hammers out the finishing touches on a new press mold with intricate carvings along its edges. For the palace, presumably, you hazard a guess. The blacksmith nods. They want their tofu embossed with the emperor's personal crest. It's all about presentation. He snorts softly in amusement. I once made a mold shaped like a phoenix. The palace chefs wanted tofu so detailed you could see individual feathers. Took me weeks to get it right. He wipes sweat from his brow, apparently still recovering from that job. Moving farther into the workshop, you spot a tall, cylindrical object made of clay and reinforced with metal bands. An older craftswoman, hair streaked with grey, stirs something inside with a long paddle. The smell is sharp. Vinegar, perhaps. This is a fermentation chamber for stinky tofu. She explains, noticing your intrigue. We can regulate the temperature more precisely now, thanks to these adjustable vents. She points to a small cluster of sliding panels near the base. That means a more controlled fermentation, letting us tweak the intensity of the aroma. For some folks, the stinkier, the better. Others prefer just a mild funk. You stifle a grin, recalling your run-in with black garlic tofu earlier. Tang folks have definitely embraced the pungent side of life. A comedic moment unfolds when one apprentice tries to demonstrate the donkey-driven mill you saw earlier. The donkey evidently is not in a cooperative mood. It brays stubbornly, refusing to move. Maybe it wants hazard pay. Someone jokes, drawing laughs from the crowd. The apprentice, red-faced, coaxes it with a carrot, but the donkey just eyes the contraption suspiciously. You half expect the donkey to demand a tofu sample first. Fair's fair. Nearby, a group of merchants negotiates with an inventor over a prototype that resembles a wooden cradle. Portable tofu press. The inventor says, tapping the structure's hinged sides. You can fold it up and take it to your next festival or market stall. People love fresh tofu on the go. The merchants exchange glances, weighing the potential profit. If it's sturdy, we'll buy 5, one says, trying to sound nonchalant. But you can sense their excitement. Portable tofu making could be the next big hit in a city where novelty is currency. As dawn light grows stronger, the workshop district picks up pace. More artisans arrive, rolling carts packed with raw materials. Sparks from active forges light up the morning gloom. You notice a comedic tussle when a blacksmith chases an apprentice who nearly knocked over a newly crafted steam infusion cylinder. Shouts of alarm and relief echo through the yard. A moment later, the blacksmith returns to his anvil, shaking his head like a parent scolding a clumsy child. Pausing at the edge of the workshop, you take a moment to soak in the organized chaos, hammers ringing, saws whining, gears turning, donkey braying, and behind it all, a collective determination to push the boundaries of tofu technology. One fringe tidbit surfaces from the chatter apparently. Some engineers are experimenting with water-powered mills that could automate tofu production on a large scale. It's still in the might blow up if we're not careful phase, but the ambition is unmistakable. Perhaps in another century or so, they'll figure out the perfect design, or blow a hole in a city wall trying. Ultimately, you realize this hustle and invention reflect the Tang ethos itself, bold, forward-thinking, and unafraid to mix practicality with spectacle. Whether it's donkey-driven mills or steam-infused tofu tubes, these tech tools symbolize the empire's drive to refine every facet of its culture, even something as unassuming as bean curd. You can't help but be swept up in that spirit. With a final glance at a newly completed tofu press gleaming in the morning sun, you step away from the workshop, mind buzzing with possibilities. Perhaps you'll see those same tools in action at a palace feast, churning out tofu shaped like phoenixes or dragons, or maybe even new forms that no one has yet dreamed of. And you have a feeling that wherever tofu goes next, the Tang Dynasty's gadgeteers will be right behind it, hammering, sawing, and inventing with a gusto that borders on glee. Winding back through the lively city streets, you eventually find yourself in a quieter district steeped in storytelling tradition. Small opera houses and tea houses line the road, and the lingering tunes of flutes and fiddles trail into the crisp morning air. You notice intricately painted signs advertising puppet shows, acrobatics, and something called Legends of the Cloud Tofu. That last title piques your interest. Could tofu really star in a local legend? A bit of casual eavesdropping leads you to a modest tea house with murals along its wooden walls, each depicting surreal scenes: a man in ancient garb holding a glowing block of tofu, a demon fleeing from a tofu-shaped amulet, a mountain deity gifting a mortal an enchanted soy plant. At first, it's downright comical, yet the artist's skill in capturing these fantastical moments, complete with swirling mist and otherworldly light, suggests there's more to these stories than simple child's play. You settle onto a low bench inside, and a soft-spoken server brings you a small pot of tea alongside, of all things, tofu pudding drizzled with sweet syrup. "Try this," she whispers, "House specialty, rumored to calm even the most restless spirit." You take a hesitant spoonful. It's delicate, silky, and sweet in a way that makes your shoulders relax. If only donkey milk tofu tasted this soothing. Sipping your tea, you let your gaze wander around the tea house. A man in a sweeping robe takes center stage on a tiny platform, reciting old fables. One tale references a flying tofu bun that soared through the night sky, aiding a lost traveler. Complete nonsense, obviously. But the crowd listens intently, nodding at each dramatic twist. You remember reading that Tang folklore often blurred the line between reality and myth. Maybe tofu, given its almost shape, shifting versatility, naturally sparked tall tales. At a nearby table, you overhear a spirited conversation between two patrons. One recounts a legend of an alchemist who tried to transform soybeans into gold, but ended up inventing tofu instead. In some stories, he says, the alchemist offered it to a passing monk, thinking it was a worthless by-product, only to realize later he'd created a culinary treasure. His companion snorts. A treasure that tasted like bean mush. Are you sure the monk didn't just pretend to like it? They burst into laughter. Perhaps there's a kernel of truth in these myths. Or maybe they're just playful inventions folks spin for fun. A traveling storyteller wearing a patchwork cloak arrives, toting a folded paper screen. Once assembled, it reveals vivid images of a legendary tofu creature, part phoenix, part fish, said to haunt palace kitchens at midnight, testing the moral fiber of greedy cooks. The storyteller's voice dips low, weaving a tale of how those who hoard the best tofu for themselves meet with soggy, tasteless misfortunes. The audience chuckles at the moral lesson, but some also exchange uneasy glances, as if they aren't entirely sure it's all make-believe. Meanwhile, just a few steps away, an older musician hums a tune on a guqin. Interspersed between verses, he references the magic of bean curd, likening tofu's formlessness to the Taoist principle of emptiness, capable of becoming anything, yet clinging to nothing. One mainstream historical fact is that Taoist and Buddhist philosophies influenced Tang culture deeply, sometimes seeping into daily routines and even food choices. Tofu, with its shapeless adaptability, could easily be seen as a metaphor for spiritual teachings. After all, it's a blank slate waiting to be infused with flavor, much like a mind open to new insights. Leaning in to catch every note, you suddenly catch a comedic tidbit. The musician mentions an old folk legend where bandits once tried to steal the emperor's golden tofu, only to be duped by a palace cook who served them donkey, milk tofu tinted with saffron. They escaped with their loot. The musician chuckles softly, never realizing it would dissolve in their saddlebags. The audience roars with laughter at the image of confused bandits discovering a dripping bean curd mess. It's a silly scenario, but who's to say it wasn't whispered among villagers, fueling the idea that tofu's magic can outfox even hardened criminals. After the musician's performance ends, a few listeners gather around a tattered old scroll laid out on a low table. It's illustrated with images of mythical beasts, dragons, phoenixes, and oddly enough, a pudgy little tofu spirit with wide eyes and a mischievous grin. One of the listeners points to it and says, "They say if you place a piece of tofu by your bedside under a full moon, this spirit will visit you in a dream, either blessing your kitchen with endless supplies or cursing you with tofu that never coagulates." The group nods gravely, though you sense at least one or two are stifling giggles. Still, the sincerity on most faces suggests some folks genuinely believe in, or at least fear, these old superstitions. You think back to a fringe tidbit you heard in the palace, rumors of tofu walking off. If prepared improperly, could that trace its roots to these folk tales of tofu spirits? It's not a huge leap. In an age when scientific understanding was limited, mysterious happenings in the kitchen were often pinned on mischievous entities or bad omens. And even now, with so many odd additives, donkey milk, snail mucus, ant powder, who's to say some unexpected reaction might not spark rumors of a haunted pot? Seated back at your table, you glance at the murals again. One scene depicts a Tang warrior offering tofu cubes to a gigantic serpent, presumably to appease it. Another shows a celestial maiden stirring a vat of bean curd while stars whirl overhead. You can't help but chuckle. Tofu's legendary cameos are as varied as the empire's cultural influences. Maybe that's the point. A shapeless, flavor-absorbing food lends itself to tall tales and imaginative leaps. If it can assume the taste of anything, why not also assume a mythic role in storytelling? The Tea House host, noticing your curiosity, approaches with a grin. "We've got a stack of folk stories on tofu, if you'd like to read," she offers, holding up a small pile of yellowed papers. Some are silly, some serious, all entertaining. Supposedly, a few were even penned by minor court officials who moonlight as storytellers. You politely decline. For now, though the thought of diving into centuries-old tofu fan fiction is tempting. The host shrugs amiably and drifts away to greet new patrons. The sun's rays start to filter through the tea house windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Conversations wind down as people finish their morning tea. You drain the last drop of your own cup, savoring the lingering sweetness of that silky tofu pudding. There's a kind of hush as the stage empties, leaving only the remnants of half-whispered tales in the corners of the room. You stand, stretching your legs, and step outside to find the city's daytime hustle already revving up. Your mind buzzes with the sheer range of stories you've heard: alchemist mishaps, bandit capers, tofu spirits, and cosmic kitchen gods. Even if most of it is pure fantasy, the collective imagination poured into tofu folklore clearly runs deep. Maybe historians still argue whether tofu came from a brilliant inventor or a series of happy accidents. But the people here have spun those uncertainties into legends and myths that add another layer of richness to an already multifaceted dish. As you walk away, you picture a future traveler, or even a modern tourist, hearing these same stories centuries from now. Would they scoff at the idea of a tofu spirit or donkey milk illusions? Or would they, like you, find a certain magic in the notion that a simple bean curd could inspire so many tall tales? Smiling to yourself, you continue along the streets, feeling that you carry a piece of these legends with you, as light and malleable as tofu itself, ready to blend seamlessly into the next chapter of this extraordinary night, turned day in the Tang Dynasty. Stepping back onto the bustling main avenue of Chang'an, you notice something new in the morning sunlight: caravans of camels, donkeys, and horses meandering into the city, their riders chattering in a mixture of local dialects and foreign tongues. Brightly woven rugs hang over the beasts' backs, and crates tied with rope clatter as they pass. You've stumbled into the swirl of merchants and travelers who've come from beyond the empire's borders. A reminder that the Tang capital isn't just a cultural hotspot for locals but a magnet for goods and ideas from distant lands. And as you soon learn, this traffic also plays a starring role in tofu's evolving story. Inhaling deeply, you catch wafts of exotic spices from open crate: cinnamon from the far south, peppercorns from the western regions, saffron rumored to hail from Persia, and a swirl of other scents that defy easy classification. A rickety stall run by a Sogdian merchant proudly displays rows of glass jars filled with vibrant powders. He calls out to passers-by, inviting them to sample a pinch on the tip of a wooden scoop. You watch a curious local dip a finger into something bright red, paprika. The merchant claims, or a cousin of it, and then sputter at the sudden burst of smoky heat. Everyone within earshot bursts into laughter, including you, momentarily picturing yourself trying to keep a dignified face after tasting donkey milk tofu spiced with foreign pepper. Nearby, you notice a small group of palace chefs, recognizable by their embroidered sleeves, lurking around these spice stalls, discreetly snapping up pouches of the more unusual powders. One of them confides in the vendor that the emperor's next feast must outdo the last, and only a dash of saffron, lime blend will give the tofu that otherworldly glow. You recall hearing that saffron had begun trickling into Tang territories via the Silk Road, fetched from lands so far away that the spice itself carried an air of mystery. One mainstream historical fact: Chang'an served as a key nexus in the Silk Road network, meaning merchants from Central Asia, the Middle East, and even parts of Europe all funneled their goods here, inevitably impacting local cuisine. You slip behind a stack of crates to observe these hush dealings. The chefs inspect each spice with an air of practiced skepticism. Could this be the rumored demon spice from the southwestern jungles? One chef asks in a low voice, holding up something that looks like black pepper. Another shakes his head. No, demon spice is chunkier, smells sharper. This is more like Indian pepper. They cast furtive glances around, as if worried their competition might spy on them. You half expect to see a donkey in the corner, holding a hidden notebook to scribble down these secret recipes. Drifting on, you pass a stall selling dried fruit and nuts. Figs, apricots, pistachios, all foreign treasures that brighten up banquet tables. The vendor, a jovial man with a sun-browned face, notices your curious expression. He lifts a small pouch of dried apricots, offering them for free. When you pop one into your mouth, the burst of sweetness makes you grin. These go wonderfully in tofu stews. He whispers conspiratorially. My wife swears by it. A sweet and savory fusion. You imagine a pastel-hued tofu dish flecked with bits of apricot, bridging a flavor gap you never knew existed. Just behind his stall, you discover a cluster of smaller tents set up by merchants from the far west. One displays tall glass containers filled with fragrant oils, rose, jasmine, sandalwood, each said to enhance certain recipes if used sparingly. You recall from the palace kitchens how sometimes a single drop of floral essence can elevate tofu from bland to blissful, especially if the emperor's taste leans toward aromatic novelty. A comedic thought flits through your mind. Donkey, milk tofu infused with rose oil. Would that be heaven on a plate or an olfactory nightmare? You can't decide. A short distance away, an official scribe is interviewing foreign traders, jotting down notes on a bamboo slip. You sidle closer to hear him peppering them with questions. How the spices are grown, what conditions they need, which season yields the best flavors. He mentions that historians still argue whether some of these foreign seasonings first arrived during the Han or truly flourished in the Tang. The traders shrug. They're here to sell, not to settle academic disputes. But you can sense the scribe's excitement. He's collecting knowledge that might reshape how local cooks handle tofu and other dishes. One fringe tidbit you overhear from a passing conversation, a rumor that some caravans carry cactus powder from an unnamed desert region, supposedly used to give tofu a bouncy texture. It's a big hit in the southwestern provinces, a vendor claims, though he can't produce any actual samples. The idea of adding cactus to tofu conjures up comedic images. Would it taste spiky? Or maybe it'd allow Tang chefs to create tofu with a springy chew reminiscent of a rubber ball. You can almost see an apprentice cook bouncing tofu cubes down the kitchen halls, to the dismay of dignified palace officials. Pressing on, you encounter a group of travelers preparing a caravan for departure, their crates labeled for distant cities. One crate is filled with small clay pots of fermented tofu. A female traveler, draped in patterned fabrics, explains that she's taking these pots to the western frontier. Our customers there can't get enough, she says, beaming with pride. They pair it with flatbreads or mix it into stews. Her eyes sparkle. It's surprising how well tofu crosses cultural lines. So long as you've got the spices to match local tastes, everyone finds a way to make it delicious. You step aside to let a camel pass, laden with sacks of saffron and fennel, presumably heading deeper into the city. As the animal ambles by, you hear its handler grumble about the strong scent of fermented tofu wafting from a nearby stall. I'd rather smell donkey breath, he jokes, wrinkling his nose. The stall owner retorts with mock offense, offering a free sample. The handler nearly gags but ends up laughing heartily. Moments like this show how cultural exchange can be comedic as well as enlightening. Eventually, you gravitate toward a more formal trading post, an official compound with tall wooden gates and guards stationed out front. Inside, caravans unload valuable spices and rare goods, each item catalogued under watchful eyes. You manage a glimpse through the gates boxes of star anise, bundles of coriander, sacks of turmeric. A pair of palace representatives stands by with measuring scales, deciding how best to distribute these goodies to different kitchens in the capital. The conversation you overhear indicates they're ranking the chefs, requests by importance. The emperor's banquets come first, of course, but high-ranking officials have also placed orders, hoping to impress guests with exotic tofu dishes. One representative remarks that last season, the court tried an experimental tofu braised in coconut milk, brought by sailors from the south, and laced with Middle Eastern spices. It was, he confesses, a gamble that met with mixed reviews. Some found it too sweet, he says, shrugging. Others praised it for its sheer novelty. Still, the fact they tried it at all underscores how foreign influences keep reshaping tofu's identity. You recall a mainstream historical fact: the Tang Dynasty prided itself on being cosmopolitan, welcoming to outside ideas. That inclusive spirit not only fueled the empire's cultural zenith, but also made it a playground for cross-pollinating flavors. A minor ruckus draws your attention to the far corner, where a donkey has managed to nose open a crate of spices. The small beast sniffs around, scattering saffron and peppercorns. Guards rush over, panicked at the potential loss of precious cargo. The donkey lifts its head, a bright streak of saffron dust clinging to its muzzle, making it look like it just raided a high-end makeup kit. The sight is so absurd that even the guards can't help but laugh. You find yourself grinning, thinking, if that donkey ever found its way to the palace kitchen, donkey milk tofu might be the least bizarre outcome. As the trading post begins to wind down for midday prayers and meals, you slip away, reflecting on how these foreign spices will soon ripple through Chang's culinary scene. The palace chefs will scheme up new recipes, the markets will clamor for the next exotic twist, and everyday cooks might find creative ways to marry old and new flavors. Tofu, as always, stands at the center, an edible ambassador absorbing the bestest and occasionally weirdest influences from every corner of the known world. After all you've witnessed, you can't help but smile at the thought that something so unassuming has become a canvas for global experimentation. With a last glance at the departing caravans, camels plodding along with jingling bells, traders calling out in foreign accents, you head back toward the city's winding lanes. In your mind, you're already imagining tofu spiked with saffron, tinted pink with beets, or dusted with southwestern peppers. The possibilities feel as endless as the trade routes themselves. If donkey milk and snail slime didn't limit the empire's culinary zeal, neither will these new spices. In the Tang Dynasty, innovation is practically a rite of passage, and tofu stands ever, ready to be reinvented, reflecting the empire's open embrace of the vast, flavorful world. You drift from the clamor of merchant caravans into a more tranquil part of Chang'an, where small courtyards are nestled between greenery and temple walls. The morning sun filters through blossoming trees, casting dappled light on pathways. Monks in saffron robes glide silently by, their heads shaved, hands folded in prayer. You sense an air of contemplative calm, an oasis of reflection compared to the bustling trade district. Something about this environment feels perfectly suited to tofu's gentler side, and as you soon discover, that intuition isn't misplaced. A melodic gong sounds from within a nearby temple, prompting you to follow the low, resonant hum. You pass through a tall archway into a courtyard where a group of pilgrims sits cross-legged, listening to a monk speak. Though you can't quite catch every word, you gather that he's extolling the virtues of a plant-based diet, mentioning how abstaining from meat fosters compassion and spiritual focus. It dawns on you, these monks are early adopters of a lifestyle we might call vegetarian. One mainstream historical fact you recall is that during the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism enjoyed a strong footing, championed by emperors like Gaozong and Xuanzong, though support varied over time. With Buddhism came an emphasis on kindness to living creatures and the avoidance of violence. Naturally, this approach popularized vegetarian cuisine within monastic communities, and tofu emerged as a crucial source of protein. Soft enough for novices to chew without complaint, yet filling enough to sustain vigorous daily routines. You can't help but think, if the modern concept of plant-based has a deep ancestor, this might be it. A robed attendant offers you a simple wooden bowl filled with a steaming tofu stew. It's speckled with bits of leafy greens and carrots. Despite its humble appearance, the aroma envelops you in a comforting warmth, savory with a whisper of garlic and ginger. You take a careful sip, half expecting the tame blandness people often associate with vegetarian fare. Instead, you're greeted by a hearty, rich flavor. One of the monks notices your pleased expression. "People underestimate tofu," he says gently. "It can be a full meal unto itself, much kinder on both body and spirit." You nod, conceding the point. As you settle on a stone ledge, the monk elaborates on how tofu's popularity has been rising beyond temple walls. Some officials seeking longevity or purity have started adopting partial vegetarian diets, he explains. They might not abandon roast duck entirely, but they incorporate tofu to balance their meals. He mentions that more than one high-ranking official swears by a routine of tofu soup at sunrise for maintaining mental clarity and robust health. Another comedic thought forms: donkey milk tofu might not exactly scream serenity, but you figure these folks have likely perfected subtler recipes. Nearby, two visiting scholars whisper fervently. You catch them debating whether tofu's newfound fame owes more to health reasoning or religious devotion. Historians still argue whether tofu's surge was purely spiritual or if practical nutrition played the larger role, one scholar says, adjusting his spectacles. Certainly, the monks championed it for ethical reasons, but you can't ignore how cost-effective and flexible it is. The other scholar nods in agreement. And let's not forget the emperor's impetus. He might encourage tofu consumption to appease Buddhist factions without alienating meat-loving courtiers. Another monk, listening from the sidelines, chimes in with a fringe tidbits. In some remote monasteries, he says, they ferment tofu with a special fungus found only in certain caves. They believe it enhances not just flavor, but meditative focus. He chuckles as if sharing an inside joke. Though, from what I've heard, it can produce some rather vivid dreams. We joke that it's tofu that helps you see through illusions, sometimes literally. A few monks laugh good-naturedly, while the scholars exchange skeptical glances. You decide to explore the temple grounds, weaving through narrow corridors adorned with murals of lotus flowers and serene bodhisattvas. In one alcove, you glimpse a small shrine lined with offerings. Bowls of fruit, grains of rice, and yes, a plate of neatly sliced tofu. The layering of spirituality and food here is undeniable. Each morsel is consecrated, offered as a symbol of compassion toward living beings. You can't help but reflect on how tofu's malleability has turned it into a star at high society banquets and austere monastic meals alike. Walking onward, you come across a modest library where a monk sits copying text by hand. You peek over his shoulder at the graceful calligraphy. He's transcribing a treatise that includes dietary guidelines for attaining tranquility of mind. Intrigued, you scan the lines until one phrase jumps out. Those who partake in the pure bean may reduce the burden on their soul. You wonder if that's an exaggerated claim or if Tang's spiritual leaders genuinely believed in tofu's purifying effects. Likely a bit of both. Exiting the library, you pass a small garden. Rows of soy plants thrive in neat plots, their leaves are vibrant green. A few novices kneel in the soil, carefully checking for pests. You recall how Tang agriculture, bolstered by improved farming techniques, allowed for more efficient soybean cultivation. The novices chat excitedly about the next harvest, remarking that the temple's supply of tofu is crucial for feeding their growing community and for hosting pilgrims who pass through. One novice jokes, if we run out, we might have to pray for a miracle tofu block to drop from the skies. Another giggles, retorting, knowing our luck, it'd probably be donkey milk tofu that fell on our heads. They share a light-hearted laugh, and you join in silently. The conversation drifts to a comedic anecdote. Apparently, a traveling monk once tried to replicate the imperial roast duck tofu for a temple festival. He shaped and seasoned the tofu so convincingly that a dog passing by stole the dish before anyone could eat it. Fooled into believing it was real meat. So much for non-violence. One novice quips, and the others burst into laughter at the irony. As midday sun warms the temple courtyards, a small crowd of curious visitors gathers to learn about vegetarian cooking. A senior monk stands before them, demonstrating how to press tofu, marinate it with simple spices, and simmer it in a clay pot. He explains each step with patient clarity. Soaking the beans reminds us of life's potential. Pressing the curds is a reminder that adversity can shape us. And in the end, we become a vessel for flavor, a reflection of what we absorb. You note how seamlessly he weaves Buddhist teaching into a cooking tutorial, turning every gesture into a mini lesson in mindfulness. A gentle hush settles as the monk stirs the simmering pot. Steam curls in the sunlight, carrying a savory aroma that makes your stomach flutter. Then he lifts a spoon to taste, nods with approval, and invites a few visitors to sample. Their faces light up at the warmth and richness of tofu that's been lovingly prepared. Whispers spread. "I could live off this," says one impressed onlooker. Another jokes, "Don't tempt me or I'll become a monk just for the food." You wander back to the main courtyard, mulling over how this proto-health movement, fueled by religious conviction, catapulted tofu into the spotlight as a meat alternative. It's no wonder so many high-born officials and even some royals have dabbled in vegetarian feasts. After all, it promises improved health, moral virtue, and maybe a bit of spiritual credit. And if tofu can mimic the taste of meat well enough to fool a dog, who's to say a die-hard carnivore won't be pleasantly duped as well? The temple gong sounds again, signaling the start of midday prayers. A hush falls over the courtyard as monks and pilgrims file inside the main hall. You watch quietly from the steps, feeling the calm ripple through the air. The synergy of spiritual devotion, agricultural know-how, and culinary art has created a special niche for tofu here. One that transcends the theatrics and competitiveness you've seen in the city. It's a gentler, more introspective side of the Tang obsession. Stepping away, you leave the temple walls behind, your heart lighter and your stomach still warmed by that simple tofu stew. You sense how deeply tofu has woven itself into Tang identity, from palace theatrics to theological principles, from donkey milk experiments to mindful vegetarian meals. Every corner of this empire, it seems, has found its own reason to celebrate the soybean curd. As you head back toward the busy streets, you wonder how many more facets of tofu remain hidden, waiting for you to stumble upon them in this sprawling tapestry of Tang life. By the time you leave the serene temple courtyard, the city bustles at full force under the midday sun. You decide to venture beyond Chang'an's grand avenues, following a winding rural road that leads to the outskirts. Rolling hills stretch before you, dotted with scattered clusters of homes and modest farms. The air feels fresher, scented by wild grass and faint wood smoke. You notice fewer traders and officials out here, just everyday folks going about their lives. Yet, as you soon discover, their connection to tofu can be just as lively and celebratory as anything you've witnessed inside palace gates. A rhythmic drum beat in the distance catches your ear. Intrigued, you round a bend and stumble upon a small village in the thick of a festival. Banners flap in the breeze, inscribed with cheerful slogans in simple calligraphy. Children dart between stalls, giggling as they wave paper flags. From one makeshift stage, you hear a clanging of cymbals accompanying a local troupe's performance. It doesn't take long to spot something familiar. Just beyond the crowd stands a row of tables piled high with tofu-based dishes, each one looking more rustic and arguably more mouth-watering than the last. As you step closer, you see a stout, beaming woman ladling out portions of braised tofu into earthenware bowls. Next to her, a younger fellow fans a charcoal grill lined with tofu skewers marinated in chili sauce. People queue up eager, chatting and swapping gossip while they await their servings. One comedic moment unfolds when a gruff farmer protests that the spiciest marinade isn't spicy enough. He claims donkey milk tofu at the palace is probably tamer. The grill master raises an eyebrow, then dunks a skewer into an extra fiery pot, handing it over. The farmer takes one bite, yelps, and promptly guzzles a cup of water. Laughter spreads through the line, and you can't help but join in. "Welcome to our Harvest Tofu Festival," the stout woman says, greeting you as she hands you a bowl. "We hold this celebration every year after we gather the soybeans." She gestures at a nearby field where golden, brown plants wave in the breeze. You recall a mainstream historical fact. The Tang Dynasty improved agricultural techniques, including better irrigation and new seed varieties, boosting soybean cultivation. Clearly, these villagers have turned their harvest into an excuse for a good party, complete with music, dancing, and of course, tofu in every form imaginable. A group of local drummers passes by, pounding out a lively rhythm that sets the festival's tone. You wander among the stalls, sampling a bit of everything: tofu fried with garlic sprouts, tofu simmered in a light miso-like sauce, even tofu fries, dusted with salt that children munch like snacks. One booth brags about its tofu pudding topped with crushed sesame and peanuts. The vendor swears it's the dessert to end all desserts. Smoother than donkey milk tofu, he declares with a mischievous grin. You taste a spoonful, and it's indeed creamy enough to make you hum with delight. Pausing near a wooden platform, you watch a handful of villagers performing a comedic skit. They reenact a story about a young couple who couldn't afford meat for their wedding banquet. According to local law, they creatively shaped tofu into fish, chicken, even tiny imitation piglets, fooling half the guests. Historians still argue whether these folk tales sprang from real events or were pure myth. An older man standing beside you mutters, stroking his wispy beard. But if you ask me, it shows how tofu has been the secret hero for thrifty celebrants all along. The skit ends with the newlyweds revealing the ruse, and the guests bursting into good-natured laughter, mirroring the real-life audience's reaction. Further into the village square, you notice a row of large clay pots bubbling over small fires. A teenage girl explains they're making community stew, tossing in tofu, seasonal vegetables, and leftover scraps from local farms. Neighbors take turns stirring, adding a pinch of salt or a handful of herbs. "It's our way of sharing," she says. No one leaves hungry at festival time. Overhearing her, a passing donkey "yes, they're everywhere," apparently brays loudly, almost as if demanding its own share. A fringe tidbit you glean from a nearby conversation: some families feed leftover tofu dregs to their farm animals. Chickens, pigs, or even donkeys, claiming it makes the animals stronger. Might explain why donkey milk's a thing? A local jokes. They're bulking up on bean curd. You stop to rest on a bench at the edge of the square, sipping cool barley tea offered by a friendly merchant. Children dart around you, some wearing hats shaped like tofu blocks. A local craft, no doubt. It's a colorful scene that reminds you how tofu has truly permeated every layer of Tang society. While the palace might stage extravagant banquets with tofu phoenixes, these villagers celebrate the harvest with simpler, but equally inventive fare: tofu stuffed into dough, tofu marinated with pickled vegetables, tofu crumbled into rice porridge for the elderly who can't chew tough food. You can see how necessity and creativity go hand in hand, forging a community tradition that's vibrant, joyful, and practical. A newlywed couple in the festival crowd catches your attention. Their family members hover around them, laughing and offering platters of food. Amid the usual wedding festivities, exchanging symbolic gifts and reciting vows, there's a local custom you learn about. The groom must present a specially prepared tofu dish to the bride's family. Supposedly, if they approve of its taste and texture, it symbolizes his promise to nurture and care for their daughter. You watch as he nervously hands over a steaming bowl of tofu with ginger and scallions. The bride's father takes a bite, nods in satisfaction, and the crowd cheers. It's a sweet, down-to-earth moment that underscores tofu's cultural importance. Not just a meal, but a token of unity and goodwill. Another comedic scene unfolds when a traveling bard tries to incorporate donkey milk tofu into a comedic song. He's strumming a lute and crooning about how donkey milk might cure heartbreak, enlarge biceps, and ward off ghosts all at once. The crowd dissolves into laughter, some folks calling out, "Sing more about the ghosts!" Or, "What if the donkey's on strike?" The bard ad-libs a verse about a stubborn donkey that only yields milk if you promise it gourmet tofu. The spontaneous silliness leaves everyone in stitches, proving once again that donkey milk is forever the comedic sidekick in tofu lore. Later in the afternoon, local musicians take the stage, filling the air with lively flute and drum melodies. People spill into the open square, dancing in circles hand in hand. An older woman dances with a bowl of steamed tofu balanced precariously on her head, a tradition said to bring blessings of abundance. She never spills a drop, moving with a grace that suggests years of practice. Children follow her lead, giggling as they try to mimic the balancing act with empty bowls. Their attempts fail hilariously, sending bowls clattering onto the ground. More laughter ensues, and someone jokes, "Maybe we should fill them with donkey milk tofu to stick better." Amid the revelry, you strike up a conversation with one of the festival organizers. A bearded man who's been directing dancers and musicians all day. He proudly explains that this annual tofu harvest festival not only marks the end of the soybean season, but also serves as a reminder of communal resilience. "When times are tough, tofu fills bellies without emptying purses," he says, eyes twinkling. "And when times are good, we honor it with music and laughter." He points to a weathered plaque on a nearby building that commemorates a year of poor harvest long ago. "We survived that crisis largely thanks to soybeans. And we don't forget, tofu is our unsung hero." You linger until dusk, enthralled by the warm spirit that pervades the festival. As lanterns are lit and the village square is illuminated by a soft golden glow, you watch the final dances and songs. There's no palace grandeur here, no elaborate tofu sculptures shaped like mythical beasts, but there's an unmistakable joy that makes the food taste even richer. The villagers gather in a large circle, passing around trays of fried tofu morsels dipped in sweet chili sauce, urging you to try just one more bite. You do, savoring the crispy exterior and the comforting familiarity of well-seasoned bean curd. Eventually, the music winds down, and families start drifting home with full bellies and content hearts. You stroll toward the outskirts, where the hills are dark silhouettes against a fading sky. Glancing back at the flickering lanterns, you realize that beyond palace walls and scholarly debates lies a grassroots devotion to tofu that's every bit as inventive and celebratory, perhaps even more so. In these village festivals, tofu isn't just an ingredient for show, it's a unifying force, a representation of local pride, and a gentle reminder of how communities can thrive using what the land provides. Your steps carry you away from the festivities, a comforting fullness in your stomach. The echo of drums and laughter fades, replaced by the quiet chirp of crickets. You reflect on all the forms tofu has taken so far: courtly illusions, religious nourishment, comedic folklore, innovative gadgets. And now, communal feasting in a humble village square. Each setting weaves a different thread into the tapestry of the Tang Dynasty's tofu obsession. And though your body might be tired from a day's worth of exploration, your mind buzzes with gratitude for having witnessed one more joyful chapter in tofu's unlikely journey.